Sorry that we're a couple minutes late. Yeah, Calvin, you. Hurry up.
I'll be up in Ogden for at least 4 days a week for the next couple months. Is that good? It's good, yeah. Change is good.
Oh, they're here.
Little
They're just back there chatting because you were.
was Justin. Jason.
All right, Paul's giving us the go-ahead. YouTube's up and going, so we'll begin. Oh, was that a okay sign? Okay, great. So we'll bring our RAC meeting, or our wildlife board meeting to order. This is obviously our January 11th installment of the wildlife board. We welcome everybody that's here. We appreciate the public process, and we time. Oh, what happened? Is that better? Okay. Taking the time to be here and to help with that whole process as we determine the best thing for the wildlife in the state. We'll begin with some introductions. Over to our right, over there, Tuvu Wood. Thank you very much for everything that you do, and Stacy Coons, who makes sure everything goes. Let's start over here, Steve, if you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Steve Dalton. I represent the southern region. I'm from Teasdale.
Kevin Albrecht, representing Southeastern Region, and I live in Farron.
Calvin Crandall from Springville, representing the Central Region.
Byron Bateman, I represent the Northern Region. I live in South Weber.
Mike Fowlks, I'm the Director for the Division of Wildlife and the Executive Secretary for the Board.
Donnie Hunter, I live in Cedar City, and I represent the Southern Region.
Carl Hurst, I live in Orem, and I represent the Central Region.
Welcome the RAC chairs and those that are filling in for RAC chairs. So appreciate you guys being here. I'm Kirk Woodward. I'm from the Northeastern Region and live in Vernal. Have you guys had time to look over the agenda? I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda then.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes,
move
sir.
we accept this agenda.
I have a motion and a second by Steve. All in favor? Great. Minutes. It was quite a long list of minutes that you looked at. Before we take a motion there, Stacy, I mentioned to you that in the minutes it's correct. We ask for an action log item to look at the archery elk dates, but it was translated to the action log as archery deer. That's that wasn't the thing we were looking for. We were looking at archery elk. So if you'll make that correction. Minus that correction, is there any concerns about the minutes or discussion about the minutes? Okay, entertaining.
I'd make a motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, have a motion. A second by Donnie. All in favor? Okay. Old business and action log. Anything that we need to talk about today, Byron?
Not that I'm aware of right now, but we have several items coming up in our next meeting when we set the numbers for the coming hunt.
Wasn't there something from one of the racks I read in the minutes? They wanted something put on an action log.
Yeah, there's one in the minutes that we'll discuss.
Okay.
Because it may mean something, it may not by the time we finish with everything.
So by the end of the meeting, we may or may not.
And we
put
were
that on. Okay.
It was drawn to our attention today, and Dave, you're going to have to address this as we get to that portion.
Mm-hmm.
They in the Southern Region RAC, they voted to add something to our action log, but it did not get into the minutes. The Central Regions did, and that may or may not have any bearing by the time we finish discussing everything, but the Southern Region did not get in the minutes. So you'll have to explain to us what that was. I assume you said it was an item about crossbow and powered scopes.
Yes.
So I don't know where that would be the most appropriate. I guess right here. Why don't you explain that to us, Dave?
Okay. Well, if you recall, we had a discussion at the last board meeting about crossbows. And from the Southern RAC, we had voted unanimous to try to eliminate the second COR required for crossbows on the powered scopes. The first one, to get the COR, you need to have a physical limitation. The second one is if you have a sight impairment, then you can use a powered scope. And what Braden had, and I don't know if you have a copy of his email or not in front of you now.
We do now. Thank you,
But
Stacy.
I don't know that we did it justice last time, so I apologize for that. But he gave us quite an explanation of some reasons why that we should take off that restriction and just allow multiple powered scopes on the crossbows. And some of the reasons that he mentioned, as you can see there, let me see if I can find the email real quick on mine. Some items. He says you can't use multiple pin sight on a crossbow. All crossbow scopes with yardage markers have to be multi-powered. And so if you sight in a bow or crossbow with a single powered scope, you only have one range that it would be accurate at. He also believes that a person using a crossbow during archery season, let's see, let me go down through here. They have to have limitations. Crossbows are an inferior weapon to a compound bow. With the passing of powered scopes on muzzleloaders, there are currently no companies still making one-power scopes. And he talked about some of the problems, and he says the current rule, although allowing an exception to get an additional COR for a scope, further complicates the hunt for a person that already has a physical disability, and many of these disabilities do not qualify the hunter for the scope COR. And so we were asking in our southern region that this be put back on as an action log item to be considered again in the future and possibly taken to the other racks and addressed again. And we had a vote which passed unanimous. Donnie was there. I think Donnie's had some conversations with some people that use crossbows. And I don't know if you want to comment on that to help us a little bit, Donnie, or?
Well, kind of what I got out of it, I know some people that are handicapped that use crossbows, and they're handicapped, and they need a little extra help. And I think a crossbow would give them a little better quality of hunt, where they can feel better about hunting. And crossbows, I finally looked at them, and they're not a very handy weapon. They're pretty cumbersome. Most crossbows that I've seen came with powered scopes. So they have to take them off or, change them. But anyway, what I finally looked at the end was those guys need a quality hunt, and they've had something happen to them, and they haven't been able to, but the scope would let them have a little better chance and an opportunity.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Dave. So what I understand is that the southern region is asking us to consider putting on the action log a elimination of a second COR, so that when you obtain a COR to use a crossbow during the archery hunt, that you would not need a second one in order to use a magnified scope. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay. So if you feel that that's something that we need to put on the action log, I'll entertain a motion. Okay, so Byron makes the motion to do that. Do you understand that motion, Stacy? Donnie seconds it. All in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, so that will be placed on the, if you will return that message to him and let him know that we did hear that, and we will take a look at it. Who will that be assigned to, Stacy? Okay. All right. And when will we hear back? What would be the most appropriate time to hear back? Okay. All right. So that'll be on the action log for April.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director.
Okay, this is a busy time of year for the division. There's lots of stuff going on. We're doing lots of transplants, captures, and we're kicking off our the on-the-ground work on the wildlife migration initiative. So there are lots of projects going on. I'll be out at the.
By the way, great video on the migration initiative on YouTube and on the social media. That's a great video.
Yeah, it tells a great story for sure. Yeah.
Plus my son.
So anyway, there's lots of stuff going on. So if you want to get out and see some of this stuff, tomorrow I'm going to be out at the Newfoundlands on a sheep capture out there. We have other stuff coming up. I've got the schedule here. January 14th and 16th, we're doing Northern Utah elk capture Part 1. February 1st and 2nd, Northern Utah elk capture Part 2. February 3rd and 6th, Wasatch area elk capture. 7th and 8th, Book Cliffs bison capture. So there's lots of good stuff going on. So Kent Hersey keeps a running list of this stuff. So if you're interested in attending any of those, get out there and see some of the good work that we're doing with the wildlife. Legislature is just on the horizon and ready to start. We're not sponsoring or have not asked for any legislation to be ran this year. But we will be following, obviously, to see if any issues come up that we need to be involved in and help usher through. Obviously, budget is a priority, so we'll be having our appropriations committee meetings up there. And there's always something that's going to come up that we'll have to keep our eyes out open for. Obviously, the weather. Recent weather is having some adverse effects on us. We've had to cancel some elk flights, elk surveys, because there's not enough snow on the ground to do good quality counts. Ice fishing tournaments are in jeopardy. The Fish Lake ice fishing tournament, perch tournament, is in jeopardy.
Choose your words carefully there.
So, water conditions, when we have mild winters like this, water conditions down the road are worrisome. We have to worry about having enough water on the landscape for our wildlife. So obviously that's a concern. Just a quick update on our nature center at Farmington Bay. It's coming along nicely. It looks like it should be finished May, June. A lot of the buildings are already, 2 of the 3 buildings are already enclosed, and they're making great progress on that nature center. So that should be a good thing. Byron and I and several others were able to attend the midwinter WAFWA meetings, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meetings, and so I think I'm going to turn a little time over to Byron to give us an update on that.
Thank you, Director. I just want to give thanks to the division for all the work that they've done and doing right now with all these translocations, transplants, and everything they're doing. I appreciate the opportunity to represent the state of Utah and represent this wildlife board at the WAFWA meetings that happen twice a year. We just finished up the winter, like the director stated, and I represented the state. I brought back from that some information that we do. I've got and this is for the board members here and stuff like that. Utah and Alaska are the only states in the United States that have a board. Everybody else operates as a commission. But this is the Commissioner's Committee report just for the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Utah's report is in there. We had 12 states actually show up this year and represent commissioners and board members that I attended. I'm just going to pass this out to the board. You guys can look at this at your convenience and see the different reports and stuff that are in there from the different states and stuff like that. They go anywhere from one-page report. This is what's to cover what happened the last 6 months of the year. And then when we start out our commissioner board meeting, the first agenda item is 15 to 20 minutes is an update of the most important things that happened in our state the last 6 months. I feel that the most important thing that happened in our state the last 6 months was the bear's ears being reduced. President Trump come here and actually signed that into law that reduced that down to 1,000 acres. Because we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of rehabilitation and different projects and stuff down there over the years, all the different conservation groups part of the watershed initiative. So that, and then along with all the work that we're doing that Mike mentioned, that with our translocations and transplants and stuff like that, it's great to see all the work that's going on. On Saturday, that consumed all day Friday. I'm going to pass out this agenda also to the board to look at that to just see what the topics were and stuff like that. The first part of the meeting, the first half of the day, spent on just all the different states, giving their updates. So the second half of the commissioners' committee was based on 3 different topics. The first was number one, and this is what we came up with at our summer WAFWA in Vail, Colorado, is recruiting a diverse workforce. That all the states, deal with that as far as, trying to, recruit, more of a diverse workforce with problems they go through and how they're, working to solve those problems, get more people into the, the divisions and stuff like that from those areas. I'll just pass that out. I've only got one copy of each one of those. The second topic was marketing, research, and communication that all the different states do and stuff like that, how they, spend their money to go out and get more people to come back in to hunt and fish and stuff like that in their different states. And I'll just pass this one this way. The third Commissioners Committee issue topic was unique challenges, and we didn't get to this part, but when I read this after the meeting from New Mexico, one of their topics that they want to talk about, a unique challenge, is the efficacy of coyote sterilization for improving neonate ungulate survival. What that is, they're going to catch 15 coyotes, sterilize them using two different methods, to see if that would help, increase, this is primarily just to help out antelope. But I thought that was kind of, to me, it doesn't make any sense that you're going to sterilize a coyote and then turn him loose again. That he's still going to eat, he's still going to kill. But it'd be interesting to see what they come up with that if they actually, carry through with that program. But Saturday we have a joint directors and commissioners meeting, and I'll pass out those agendas too. One of the most alarming things that we set through on that is chronic wasting disease. The director from Wyoming, Scott Talbot, did a great presentation, a slide presentation that they put together on chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease is spreading more and more throughout the country, and especially across Wyoming. It's all, we've got it here in the state of Utah. It's on our eastern border with Colorado and stuff like that. But it's even more alarming than what we thought. And Mike, you want to just mention a few things on that, the highlights on chronic wasting, and then that's all I've really got as far as an update on that meeting.
Yeah, so Byron's right. That was a rather alarming presentation that was put on. Chronic wasting, there are studies that have now shown that it crosses species lines, that it's not just located in the nervous system and the lymph system, that it is located throughout the animals. So there's some real challenges we're going to have to face as we deal with this. But that gets us to one of the points I wanted to make about the association and our going there, and that is this is a great place for us to coordinate our research, coordinate the development of new technologies, and be as lean and mean and as efficient as possible in the western United States so that we're not duplicating efforts. So it's a great organization for that, and we'll coordinate our efforts on CWD as we move into the future so we can get those answers that we need. So,
just one more thing. Utah is really well represented from all the different sections and stuff like that. The different states really recognize Utah and what Utah is doing and the people that work, for the Division of Wildlife. So it's great to be able to go down and see that work that's being done. Like Mike said, it's very informative, and we can cross, information from states like that and collaborate together and work on the same thing. So they really are beneficial. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
that's all I had.
You bet.
I'd just like to thank, and with our captures this year, I spent some time down where we captured some sheep out of Zion, and I'd just like to thank Zion National Park for allowing us to get in there and remove those sheep which were getting us in trouble. We were able to remove those sheep and move them to an area where we can all enjoy them over on the North San Juan, and it was really great to work with the park people and the division and the DWR and the passion they had for those animals. It was a great experience, and I hope that can go on. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, for mentioning that. I forgot to mention that. I was going to specifically thank the park as well. That's a pretty monumental thing when we're allowed to get into the park and do some hands-on wildlife management, so that was a very good thing. So thanks, Tony.
Thank you, everybody, for that. Maybe this is a good time also to mention the Safari Club International show that's in Vegas this year. They will have a commissioners meeting at the beginning of that. I'm sure you've all been received invitations to that. if you have not, get with me and I'll explain what that is. And it's a collaboration of all of the commissions across the country, much like this meeting, but on a much smaller scale. But they've invited us to be part of that on Wednesday, the beginning of the show. So if you haven't heard about that, or if you don't have the email, get with me. 31st of January, Wednesday, whatever day that is, 30th or 31st, and I believe it's at 3:30. But get with me if you don't have the email, so that at least you know, and that way you can make a choice whether you want to be there or not. Okay, any other questions for the director? Okay, moving right along, we've got an informational item. Nathan Owens, our Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator, we'll turn the time over to you for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, my name is Nathan Owens. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. I'm here to present information on the Aquatic Invasive Species reclassification of Deer Creek Reservoir. The UDWR's Aquatic Invasive Species, or AIS program, began back in 2007 when quagga mussels were detected in Lake Mead. This was the first detection of quagga mussels or their close cousin, the zebra mussels, in the western states. So this was a pretty big deal. It was particularly concerning given the fact that quagga mussels reproduce like crazy. They can quickly take over and get out of control. They can have severe impacts, both, well, I guess all recreationally, ecologically, but also economically. Some of the pictures you see here are pretty well known. They can completely encrust and ruin boat motors, recreational equipment. Probably more concerning for Utah is their ability to clog pipes, damage water distribution systems, and completely disrupt those systems. They also have the ability to completely collapse food webs and change dynamics in some of our popular reservoirs. The Utah, like many of the western states, when we developed this program, the foundation of the program was their Watercraft inspection program. And this is a program where watercraft launching within Utah, when they show up, they are inspected and an assessment is done to determine what risk that particular boat poses to introducing quagga mussels, or in this case, any other AIS, into some of our reservoirs. The assessment is largely based on the use history of that boat. So if that boat was previously used in a quagga-infested reservoir, that is a high-risk boat. Those boats deemed to be high risk can launch, but they have to meet one of two requirements beforehand. They can either meet a required seasonal dry time, and that dry time does vary by season, or they can be professionally decontaminated by one of our trained employees. And a professional decontamination consists of an exterior wash with 140-degree Fahrenheit water and a flushing of all interior systems with 120-degree Fahrenheit water. So it's a pretty comprehensive process. We have grown the program over the years, and just to give you an idea, 2017, we inspected nearly 200,000 boats, and we decontaminated 6,500 boats. We are either the largest or one of the two largest programs in the western U.S. As you can imagine, interstate movement of boats throughout the West is a major challenge for us, and therefore coordination between the western states on how to address this is paramount and helps promote some sort of regional protection that we can all rely on as a base. Another vital component to our program is our early detection monitoring. So this, in essence, forms the basis for the risk assessment we do when we are inspecting boats. It essentially, the idea behind it is If we can detect a quagga mussel introduction or infestation early enough, then we have more options in terms of either trying to eradicate or control that population, or putting containment measures in place to make sure that population is not spread somewhere else. The early detection monitoring consists of surveys looking for adult mussels. So we do scuba surveys looking at underwater infrastructure. We do shoreline inspections where we walk shorelines looking for mussels attached to the substrate. But the bulk of it comes down to pulling these plankton nets, as you see here in the picture, through the water column, collecting water samples, and then shipping those off to labs for analysis. And there are essentially two different types of analyses that are done in the lab. The first is microscopic analysis. So they're essentially put under a microscope, and if they end up seeing an image similar to the one you see here on the top right, that raises suspicions, and then you proceed to a DNA analysis where they actually look at the DNA to determine the species of that creature. The Western states have come up with a water body classification system that we've all agreed to, with 5 distinct categories. And I'll just quickly go through them and give you an idea without trying to go into the weeds. But an undetected status means that that water body has been sampled and no larval mussels or adult mussels have been found there. An inconclusive status means that water samples were pulled and one water sample tested positive under a microscope, but could not be verified through DNA analysis. So essentially there's something a little strange going on there, but they're not quite sure what. A suspect designation, which is kind of the important thing for this presentation, means that one water sample tested positive for larval mussels, both under a microscope and through the DNA analysis. A positive designation means that that actually occurred with 2 different samples. So if you went and sampled 1 month and then you went and sampled another month, and both those samples tested positive both under a microscope and for DNA, that yields a positive designation. And then finally, the infested classification is pretty self-explanatory. That's what we have at Lake Powell, with adults everywhere, multiple age classes, and that's fairly obvious. One important thing for this presentation is, with this water body classification system, the Western states also agreed upon a process for downgrading or delisting water bodies that did fall under the inconclusive, suspect, positive, or infested designations, and put those back into an undetected status. And that process is based on a determined time frame with no new detections of either larval or adult mussels. Just a little bit of background. Lake Powell in Utah, Lake Powell was classified as infested back in 2013. I think we've probably all seen what's happened since then. The Division of Wildlife immediately began working with the National Park Service to implement exit inspections and decontaminations for boats leaving the area, essentially making sure that no attached mussels were leaving on these boats and no contaminated water was leaving within any of their interior systems. In October 2014, we had a single water sample collected from Deer Creek Reservoir test positive for the microscopic larval mussels. 5 larval mussels were detected, verified under a microscope and through DNA analysis, and Deer Creek was subsequently classified as suspect in January 2015. Similar to what happened at Lake Powell, DWR immediately began looking at options. We worked with our partner with state parks to implement exit inspections and decontaminations there as well, similar to our operations at Lake Powell. Since that initial listing, we've done intensive sampling trying to figure out exactly what's been going on at Deer Creek. DWR has collected monthly plankton samples there for the last 3 years during the boating season. So typically April through November. The Bureau of Reclamation has also collected water samples monthly there. To give you an idea, the division by itself has collected nearly 320 water samples that have all been sent off for analysis. We've also performed 6 scuba surveys where we've deployed divers looking at underwater infrastructures, the undersides of docks, substrates around the dam area, and any other underwater structure we could find. We also deployed several artificial substrate samplers, as you can see in this picture here on the bottom, that attract larval or adult mussels and where they attach, and we can easily detect them. None of this monitoring has yielded any more detections of larval or adult mussels. So going back, Deer Creek was first listed as suspect in January 2015. We've had 3 years of testing. No more larval or adult mussels have been found. Therefore, we feel confident in reclassifying Deer Creek Reservoir to an undetected status as of this month. So what does this mean to the boater? For the last 3 years, boaters at Deer Creek have undergone both entrance inspections, making sure that no mussels are coming in, but they've also undergone exit inspections, making sure that if there is a mussel population at Deer Creek, they're not transporting that population somewhere else. This is going to transition now, and Deer Creek is going to go into prevention-only mode. So those entrance inspections are still going to be in place. People are still going to be asked where they've been, making sure those inspections take place for the high-risk boats, but they will no longer be required by law to drain their boats and dry their boats prior to leaving the reservoir and launching somewhere else. So this is a huge success story. This doesn't happen very often, particularly with a reservoir that has received a suspect designation. So I think this really is a great example and demonstrates that we are right now winning this battle, and it comes down to those partnerships and those cooperative efforts, because we have the largest source of mussels in the western U.S. in Lake Powell right in our backyard, and yet we haven't had any more positive reservoirs pop up. So this program is working, and I think it's important to celebrate this success. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for, I mean, that's great news. It's something we've worked hard, spent a lot of money and time and effort and energy, so it's good to hear a success story.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. So if you've been to Lake Powell with a boat coming into Deer Creek, not going to decontaminate anymore, or if it's a suspect, you will still do that based on your dry time on the season. Is that correct?
Correct. So Lake Powell is classified as infested. So any boat coming from Lake Powell to another Utah water body will have to at least undergo a high-risk inspection. If they have not met the required seasonal dry time, they will be decontaminated before they can launch.
But we're still going to do that as a prevention
Yes.
anywhere.
Yes.
And then obviously coming out of Deer Creek, you're backing off a little bit on those inspections because it's not suspect anymore.
Exactly. Entrance inspections will continue everywhere around the state. Exit inspections at Deer Creek will just no longer occur.
Okay. All right, great. And Deer Creek was the only other water. I thought there was one down in Joe's Valley,
Electric
Huntington
Lake.
Reservoir. Somewhere down there, wasn't it suspect at one point?
We've had, I think, 3 different reservoirs show up as inconclusive approximately 5 years ago.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of, that there may have been something, but the same thing like Deer Creek, there was only one sample that was maybe.
And it couldn't be verified through DNA, so it was actually more of an inconclusive status, and then we went through now 5 years of negative testing. So
Same thing. Those same waters were tested, and it was like Deer Creek. They never could find anything else, so now they're off the list.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great.
I imagine that has something to do with water temperature. The colder the reservoir, the less likely.
It's hard to say. Part of it's probably a combination of a few things. It's probably environmental parameters, so maybe water temperature, maybe calcium levels, but it's also probably more a function of not allowing multiple inoculations of the reservoir with larval mussels, because as we all know, an invasive, when it's trying to take off, a lot of times it takes multiple introductions before a population can actually be established. When we first got the news that it was suspect and we went into containment mode, we kept our entrance inspections going, so we prevented further inoculation. So if there was something there, it just could never get enough of a hold to take off.
Great. Rat chair. Oh, sorry.
Would that be the same thing? I mean, I'm thinking of Utah Lake. Not very clear water. Does that have an effect?
It does. It's hard to know for sure, because in a lot of these reservoirs there are microhabitats that may be suitable for mussels, whereas maybe in the main channel or in the main part of the water body that's not very conducive. So it's a combination of factors, but primarily it's water temperature and calcium levels.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Additional questions? Rack chairs, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So Nathan, the monitoring bar for Deer Creek, does that come down now?
We will continue to monitor that monthly. So we'll collect plankton samples probably beginning April or May and continue through November again. Typically, every month we pick 15 to 20 locations around the reservoir where we collect those samples. So those will continue to happen. We will probably back off a little bit on our scuba surveys because that requires a lot of personnel time and are fairly complicated to coordinate logistically. But it's going to be remain one of our highest priorities. So the monitoring will continue.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
So just a reminder, well, first, Ryan Mosley will be next, Regional Aquatics Biologist. He's going to give us an informational item on Flaming Gorge Management Plan. And as he's coming up, reminder that as we move into our action items, we need comment cards from the audience. So if you want to make a comment on any action log, 7 or 8, you need to fill out a comment card and turn it in up here. There will be a time period for you to ask questions, just like we did here in this informational item, and there will be a time period for you to do comments, but you will not be allowed to do comments without a comment card. So please make sure you've got that comment card. And a reminder that this is broadcast, and so you could be on camera at any point. So back there when you're picking your nose, be careful. That's you, Greg. The joke. There we go. Got to get him to smile every once in a while. He looks so serious in these meetings. Hey, Ryan. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. First and foremost, I'd like to just state that I'm getting over a cold. That was my New Year's resolution, is to pick up a virus. So I apologize. I'm extremely congested, and dropping in elevation only seemed to make it worse. Once again, my name is Ryan Mosley. I'm the Flaming Gorge project leader for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources based out of Dutch John. My primary responsibilities are Flaming Gorge and the Green River below, but also several other waters throughout the northeastern part of the state. I'll be presenting on the Flaming Gorge Reservoir Sport Fish Management Plan today. This was a collaborative effort between ourselves, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and Wyoming Game and Fish. We started this back in 2006, so this plan has actually gone through several iterations. Really nothing drastic or major in here as far as change. It's pretty much the status quo. We've been operating under this plan for several years now, so you shouldn't expect any surprises out of this today. Just to give you a little background on Flaming Gorge Reservoir in case you're not familiar with it, it's a small impoundment up in the northeastern part of Utah. It straddles the Utah-Wyoming line. It's 42,000 acres and 91 miles long at a full pool elevation of 6,040 feet. It's a reservoir managed by the Bureau of Reclamation. They handle all the water operations there, and it's also a national recreation area managed by the U.S. Forest Service, which also includes the Green River below Flaming Gorge Dam down to the confluence of Red Creek. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources and Wyoming Game and Fish jointly manage the fishery there. As you can see on the picture there on the left, we break this reservoir down into 3 distinct management regions based on unique attributes like water quality, fish distribution, and topography. The uppermost region of the reservoir is the inflow. That's where the Blacks Fork and the Green River dump into the reservoir. Those are the 2 largest tributaries, and that's where most of the nutrients enter the reservoir, and there's little mixing up in that portion of the water body. The middle portion of the reservoir is the open hills. As you can see by the unique topography surrounding that, it's rolling sagebrush country. The reservoir itself is large open bays, quite a bit of nutrients, but it's real prone to wind-driven mixing. It is Wyoming, so we get quite a bit of wind up there. And then the canyon reach of the reservoir down that lower end. Once you enter the Boar's Tusk there, it goes all the way down to the dam. A lot less nutrients, steep sheer cliff walls, much deeper portion of the reservoir, so it's not real prone to wind-driven mixing. The fishery itself, through angler surveys conducted in 2013, it was valued at $12 million to the state of Wyoming and $15 million to the state of Utah. So it's a pretty substantial fishery in regards to local economies. Management, we're currently managing the reservoir sport fishery for 5 distinct species: kokanee salmon, the bread and butter species, if you will, rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, lake trout, and smallmouth bass. We're also heavily involved with the reduction of the impacts of invasive burbot, and then also the prevention of aquatic invasive species like zebra mussels and quagga mussels, as Nate alluded to earlier. Within the plan itself, we identified several management objectives. First and foremost is to work closely with Wyoming Game and Fish Department. We have a really good relationship on the reservoir, especially at the field level, where we collaborate with all our monitoring, research, and outreach projects. Monitor and maintain the enhance the sport fishery. We have target levels that we identified for all species of fish in the reservoir, specifically kokanee salmon, rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, lake trout, and smallmouth bass. As an example, I put 3 examples down there for you. When we do our annual monitoring for kokanee salmon, we expect to see, or we desire to see, greater than 600,000 kokanee salmon in age 0, 1, or 2 or less. So those give you an idea of type of things that we actually identify. If we see target levels drop below that, or if we see if we drop below those target levels, then that would indicate that we need to kick into a different management regime, which would possibly be regulation changes, stocking adjustments, things of that nature. We also monitor health and condition and forage characteristics for all sport fish species. We monitor angler catch rates. So not only do we want to provide a substantial sport fishery, but we want to make sure that anglers are able to utilize them. So I indicated there, that's actually our statewide goal of half a trout per hour. So if you go out and fish 2 hours, you should be catching at least 1 trout while you're out there. Of course, that's just an average and a low. But we'd expect to see much higher than that, and hope you would actually see higher catch rates than that. Once again, maximize the harvest of burbot to maintain a catch rate less than a fish per hour, and then the prevention of aquatic invasive species. Stocking strategies and enhancements. Most people don't realize this, but there's actually 3 agencies that are stocking Flaming Gorge Reservoir: Wyoming Game and Fish and Utah Division of Wildlife, of course, but also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of Jones Hole National Fish Hatchery. Collectively, all 3 agencies stock 640,000 rainbow trout per year, 200,000 cutthroat trout, and about 1.7 million kokanee. All our trout are stocked at 8 to 10 inches, and all the kokanee are stocked at about 3 inches. And we try to conduct this stocking in May, June, when the growth potential is highest and survival is just going to be benefited. Historically, we also stocked brown trout and catfish. Wyoming Game and Fish took on that responsibility. It's recently been discontinued, but it could pop up in the near future as those fish become available. And then we also collaborate with wild salmon trap over in Sheep Creek, which is just a small tributary south of Manila, Utah, where we spend a couple months actually trapping kokanee salmon, taking eggs, and then raising those in the hatchery, and they're stocked back into Flaming Gorge or other waters throughout the state the following year. Just going through some of our management activities on the reservoir, we evaluate the fishery each spring and fall through trend netting. We monitor water quality and zooplankton abundance throughout the reservoir during the summer months to make sure that we're not stocking too many fish to suppress our primary forage. We monitor kokanee salmon using hydroacoustics and trawls in August each year, hydroacoustics being a real elaborate sonar unit that allows us to count fish and also estimate fish size. We monitor smallmouth bass throughout the reservoir at 36 different transects. In June of each year, monitor and suppress invasive burbot. Once again, we conduct angler surveys periodically to not only evaluate catch and harvest rates, but also to determine opinions and preferences from anglers. You know, we want to make sure that whatever product we're providing, that the anglers are happy with it. We adjust regulations when necessary, and then we're constantly proposing new research projects because it seems like the more we learn, the less we know. With that, that's a brief overview of the plan, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those right now.
Tell me what wind drift mixing is.
Wind-driven mixing, so as the wind blows, especially up in that Wyoming portion of the reservoir, it's going to mix the water.
And?
It would just spread those nutrients out throughout the water column, so they're actually utilized by zooplankton, well, actually algae first, and then zooplankton, and then the fish. So up in that up in that inflow reach of the reservoir where there's not a lot of wind-driven mixing and there's a lot of nutrients coming in, we periodically, like this past summer, will have significant algal blooms that'll actually be a detriment to fish. Where down in the open hills reach of the reservoir, as those nutrients settle out, they're getting mixed up, of course, to speed up that process, but fish are able to actually utilize the zooplankton that are taking advantage of that situation.
Okay. What measures are we taking to reduce the burbot?
Currently, we do a lot of outreach to just try to promote angler exploitation as much as possible. We're also heavily involved with tournaments that are held on Flaming Gorge each year, and some of those tournaments have a substantial amount of harvest. The burbot bash, for example, in just 2 nights, they're harvesting about 4,000 burbot.
They need ice for that, though.
You do need ice for that, although they can be caught readily from a boat, but ice definitely does.
For the burbot bash, I meant.
It does benefit the burbot bash for sure. The more ice we have, the better participation we have.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
I have one question. How do you determine each state as to how much you put in, how many fish you put in each year? You got 3 different partners you had listed there on that slide. We
have annual coordination meetings where we all just determine what responsibility we'll take on or how much we'll take on. Our Utah Division of Wildlife and Wyoming Game and Fish have been pretty consistent over the past several years. Jones Hole National Fish Hatchery, they've kind of fluctuated a little bit just because they've their responsibilities have shifted a little bit. They're doing more native fish production now than they are sport fish production. So they've taken on the sole lead on stocking cutthroat into Flaming Gorge Reservoir, and those come in the form of both Bear River and Colorado River cutthroats. But they've still been able to keep an agreement with them where they'll stock 300,000 fingerling kokanee each year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't they raise browns at Jones Hole also?
Not any longer.
Not anymore.
No. The only non-native that they raise is kokanee salmon at this point.
Additional questions? Oh, I have one. Tell me about the state record that was caught and then not the state record anymore.
It was a 55-pound fish, so it shattered the current Utah state record of 51.5 pounds. The individual that caught it had an expired license. It was only by a few days, so the state record was revoked. It would have been the state catch and release record too. It wasn't actually the state record. So that fish is still swimming around.
55-pounder.
55-pounder, yep. Depending on if it ate a kokanee or not, so give or take 2 or 3 pounds.
So if you fish there, you have to have 2 licenses?
No, sir. You can actually, if you have a Utah state license, a seasonal license, or a full season license, you can buy a Flaming Gorge reciprocal stamp from Wyoming Game and Fish for $10, and that's good for the calendar year.
Good.
Additional questions? Rack chairs, do you have any questions? Dan, do you have?
Yeah, I've got a question about the catfish stocking right now. How long has that been going on?
It was actually discontinued in 2008.
And prior to 2008, had it gone on for
It had
1 or 2
gone on
years,
for quite a few years, but it was just hit or miss, and the reason it was discontinued is because of AIS concerns, because those catfish were coming from out of state. So if they tie up a new disease-free certified source, they could very likely be stocked back into Flaming Gorge in the upcoming years. Ironically enough, somebody actually broke the Wyoming state record in Flaming Gorge with a 28.5-pound catfish just this past year. So we've had a couple big record fish come out of Flaming Gorge the last year.
I have one question. Are we being effective with getting rid of the burbot?
Our ultimate goal, we're never going to totally eradicate burbot. Our ultimate goal is to keep their numbers suppressed so we can actually decrease the opportunity for them to impact our sport fish population. So, yeah, we're never going to completely get rid of them, but we're always looking at new ways to decrease their abundance as much as possible. Currently, we're using anglers, and angler exploitation being one of the most highly identified options in the literature, but we're exploring some new options in the future that will hopefully help us turn the tide, if you will. But we basically, the burbot population has pretty much stayed stable over the last few years. So. And the good thing too is they haven't been introduced into other water bodies in Utah, which I think is very important to realize. That as we promoted this fishery, we've also educated anglers on how bad it is to move those fish. Knock on wood.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that presentation. Of course, I'm very interested in Flaming Gorge. It's in my backyard, and I enjoy what you're doing up there. So
Well,
thank you.
I appreciate your interest.
Tell us just a little bit more about what's happening with the Green River just below Flaming Gorge. How's that fishery?
It's been exceptional. You know, our numbers, the population size is down, but our average size is up, and so is our condition. So the fishery's been responding very well. Actually, this past winter, it's been pretty. Mike's actually taken advantage of this, but it's been a really good fishing year. A lot of the reports I'm getting have just been astounding. You know, the size of the fish and the quality of the fish.
So no impact with the high water, all that release last year? No,
the high water is actually beneficial for the most part. It tends to redistribute. Once again, we're talking about nutrients and things going on, but redistribute nutrients in the system. It definitely benefits the invertebrate base, you know, which is the primary forage for both brown trout and rainbow trout down there. And we see our growth rates really take off, and our condition factors. Our average size is about 2 inches greater than it was about 5 years ago. So as the number of fish have gone down, the size has gone up, you know, and you kind of see that's a classic example in response to lower densities of fish. So it's been great to just see the Green River turn and just how happy or content people are with the fishery right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving along. We're going to go on to 7. Darren, you're up. Darren DeBloois is our Mammals coordinator, and he's going to present the 2018 Black Bear recommendations and rule amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just get my presentation up here. All right, there we go. Good morning. I will be presenting our recommendations for the 2018 black bear season, and I wanted to just start quickly by giving a little background on the division and what our mandate is, what our mission is, and how we manage black bears in the state. First of all, the mission of the division is to serve the people of Utah as a trustee and guardian of the state's wildlife. One of the things that we do as part of that mission is we actively manage black bear populations. That means the division manipulates black bear populations depending on conditions on the ground. And one key part of that management strategy is hunting. Hunting does several things for us. First of all, it helps to build and maintain interest in and support for black bears as a species. Secondly, it allows our biologists to meet their management parameters as spelled out in the management plan. And it also helps us to address human conflicts when they arise. One of the reasons that we have black bears as a protected species in the state is that conservation groups, sportsmen's groups 50 years ago approached the legislature and requested that bears be a protected species. And that occurred in 1967. In 1986, the division realized we had a knowledge gap on what was going on with black bears in the state, and began a series of studies to look at black bear biology and life history. And in 1998 or 1998 and 99, as a result of a lot of that work, we drafted our first black bear management plan. And that plan was again looked at in 2011 or actually I think 2010, and adopted in 2011 and updated. And that's the plan that we currently manage black bears under. And that plan runs through 2023. In 2015, we made some significant changes to the way that we hunt black and pursue black bears, and so we've got 3 years of data with those changes now to look at. I don't want to get too far in the weeds on the management strategy. I'd be happy to answer any questions on it, but let me just say we manage black bears based on 3 hunt strategies: light, moderate, or liberal. A light strategy might be for a unit where you've got a small number of bears, you don't have a lot of human conflict, and you may want to grow populations more quickly in those, or allow populations to grow. Moderate is the strategy we manage most of our units under, and that's to maintain bear populations at a healthy level. And then we have 6 units that are liberal, and on those units generally these are units that have high bear densities. We may have problems with livestock or other human type of conflict, and so we're actually trying to suppress bear populations on those units, or at least keep a lid on things and try to address those concerns. Our adjustments then are made based on the number of adult males we see in the harvest and the number of females. All of the management recommendations you see today will be within the plan parameters except for a couple, and I'll point out those and explain why. Last year when we met, there were 6 items that came up during the process of the racks and boards that we looked at this year. And we actually put a committee together to discuss some of these items. This is just a list of the groups that were invited to participate in that committee. These are the issues that came up last year that we looked at. First of all, there was some concern about our knowledge and ability to estimate populations. Now, the management plan, population isn't a parameter in the plan, but it's always something that if you can get at is helpful. We actually did some population calculation based on our harvest, and I'll present that with the data today. So we do have a minimum adult population estimate based on that. In addition to that, we have plans to collar additional bears throughout the state, especially in high density areas, and monitor cub production and detect, see if we can detect those birth pulses. That'll help us tighten up our estimates as well. The next thing, there was a proposal last year to take the season structure for the San Juan and LaSalle's and to implement that on the Book Cliffs, and the group had most of the discussion centered on that. We'll hear more about that today. After the discussion in the group, we brought the subject back internally. We recognized that in addition to that, we had several other issues that we think need to be addressed. And what we're going to propose today is that we maintain the current season structures, but that we get together early this spring and address. And some of those are, we've got units that have high bear densities where we're really trying to pack a lot of people into those hunts, and it's probably time to really take a serious look at crowding and how we address those things, specifically on the LaSalle's and San Juan. Another thing that came up was the desire for a preference point for restricted pursuit seasons. Those seasons are fairly desirable. They're on dense bear units, and it gets tough to draw those. We do have a recommendation on those lines we'll get to here. Another subject that was raised was the size of packs. We discussed that in the group. We felt that it's a very difficult thing to enforce in the field. It's hard to tease out who belongs to what dog, And we felt like we have a mechanism in place with these restricted pursuit seasons. If we see a problem in a specific area, that we can restrict pursuit rather than restrict the number of dogs that an individual has in a group. The last 3 years we've been running an experiment on the La Salles and San Juans where we've been looking at pursuit pressure, and for the last 3 years the La Salles have had 5 pursuit permits and the San Juan has had 15. We're proposing that we flop that this year. The concern is that we've been seeing a lot of bears showing up in places where you wouldn't expect in the summer, like Moab, places like that, and we were wondering if pursuit pressure might be a part of that. So we're kind of doing an experiment where we'll up the pressure on the unit and then lower the pressure and just see if we can detect a difference between nuisance bears that are showing up in places where normally they wouldn't in the hot summer. And finally, there was some concern about harvest objective units on public land units. What the plan says is that we'll avoid harvest objective units on units that are predominantly dominated by public lands. And I think this centered mostly on the Manti. You'll see a recommendation along those lines as well. So into some of the data from the last season. These are our hunter success and statewide harvest numbers for the last 4 years. The 2017 numbers, when we start this process in late October, we still have hunts going on, and so those numbers aren't complete. But most of the harvest has taken place by then, so they shouldn't change very much. You can see that the success overall runs about 50%, 48-50%. And statewide harvest, you can see there has been increasing. This is just a graph that shows the same basic information. So on the left-hand side of the graph are the number of permits or harvested bears, and along the bottom are the years from 1990 to 2017. The orange line are the number of permits we've issued over time, and the red line are the number of bears that have been taken over time. I mentioned in 2015 we made some significant changes. We added some seasons where success is much lower, and therefore we were able to offer more opportunity on those units. These are spot and stock type of hunts where you can't use dogs or bait, and you just kind of have to go out and try to find a bear. And so that represents a fairly big jump in the number of permits. But you can see there wasn't a corresponding jump in the harvest of bears in that year. Here's our population estimate. Now this is a minimum adult population estimate based on bears that we see in the harvest. So again, on the left-hand side of the number of bears that we're estimating in the population, along the bottom are the years. The take-home here is, so this is based on adult bears 2 years and older. This doesn't include cubs. It doesn't include yearling bears. So the population number would actually be higher than this. And the reason it's a minimum is this doesn't account for any kind of natural mortality. This is just based on hunter harvest. And so anytime you have additional mortality in the system, it would raise the estimate, but it shouldn't raise the trend. And so the real take home from this slide is we're growing black bears, and so you'll see in our recommendations an increase in permits based on the increase in the number of bears. It looks like we might be seeing a possible leveling off the last 3 years, but we also saw something similar in 2008, 9, and 10. You can see on that graph, and then things picked up again. And so we'll keep an eye. The plan is designed to take these things into effect, and if we see our management parameters out in a negative way, we'll recommend permit reductions to correspond to those conditions. Another thing that frequently we look at is depredation harvest versus sport harvest. In this graph, again on the left-hand side of the numbers, along the bottom are the years. The orange line there on the bottom, or yellow, or I don't know, what color that is sometimes, but our depredation of mortality. So these are bears that are taken because they've gotten into livestock or into a crop like sunflower or melons, and they're taken either by us or wildlife services in those situations. A lot of times what we try to do when we can is have hunters take bears in depredation situations, and so those would be reflected in the red line, which is our sport harvest. You can see that as bear numbers have grown, primarily sportsmen have had the benefit of those permits and that harvest. The depredation stays fairly steady over time, and that's by design. We want to make sure that when we've got problems that sportsmen have and can help us address those problems. So on to our season recommendations. For next year, we're recommending a spring limited entry season, which would include the use of dogs and no bait from March 31st through June 1st. That's not a change. That's just adjusting for the calendar. A summer limited entry season, so this would be a bait and spot and stock season without the use of dogs, and this is a change from May 26th through June 29th. So this would currently, last year, the bait season began when the dog season ended. We're recommending that we overlap those two seasons by a week, so begin the bait season a week earlier, but that we don't allow any early baiting. So once people put bait in the field, they can go ahead and start hunting. We used to have a 2-week pre-baiting season that overlapped the end of the hound season, and we're recommending that we just let people hunt, but only a week early, not 2 weeks. The fall limited entry seasons, again, these are bait and hound or spot and stock. Those season dates are there. Those aren't changed. Those are seasons just adjusted for the calendar. Multi-season would be, there are a certain number of permits where if a person draws them, they can hunt all of those season dates depending on the unit. So whatever seasons are open on the unit, they can hunt with those permits. And finally, harvest objective seasons. We do have some units where we have, instead of a limited number of permits, we have a limited number of bears that can be taken. Once the number of bears that we recommend are taken, then those seasons close. And there's a special one on the 9 Mile that's got some special dates in the fall there, and that's just for that unit. We have a few units that have alternate seasons. So the seasons I just presented would apply across the state except for on these units. The first is a fall limited entry archery only opportunity on the Book Cliffs, Britter Creek South. You'd be allowed to have a 2-week early baiting season on that, and then you can see the dates there. And then a later dog and bait season in October and November. And then on the roadless area, archery only, same dates, and the and spot and stock only, so no bait or dogs, March 31st through June 1st, so during the spring season. And then again in the fall, September 8th through November 15th. On the LaSalle and San Juan, dogs and bait, August 11th through the 14th. And then that hunt actually runs through the 24th, but no dogs allowed during that limit entry, any weapon bull elk season from September 15th through the 24th. And then again, November 3rd through the 15th. And then a spot and stock hunt in October, the 2nd through the 23rd. One thing we're recommending on the LaSalle's, we had quite a number of complaints during the archery season when that hunt overlaps in August. And we had about 65 individual complaints from LaSalle's and 30 from the San Juan, just about having dogs in the field during an archery season. In addition to that, we received 4 letters here in Salt Lake, and one of those was a request for an error request to get points reinstated because he felt like that he didn't get the hunt that he expected. I've got Dennis Shumway is here from the southeastern region, and Dennis, maybe if you wouldn't mind taking just a second and kind of explain what went on down there, just in terms of complaints, and kind of give us a sense for what your officers had to contend with.
Dennis Shumway, Sergeant for the South Crew for the Southeast Region. I've been there for about 8 years. Every year I forget that the opener of the archery hunt, I'm expecting to work the archery hunt, and I forget that it's also the opening of the fall hound season for bears. This year I worked the opening day on the LaSalle's. August 15th, I believe, was the opening day, and I wasn't expecting what I got, which was a lot of bombardment by angry archery hunters about bears or dogs interrupting a archery hunt. I was shocked, but at the same time, people are using the field in different ways. And again, I explained to people, hey, make your concerns known. Write a letter, write an email if that's something you would like discussed. I think that's probably where the letters came from. So yeah, it's a problem. However, this year was a little bit different. Permits went up from, I think, 7 to 10 permits for the fall, and you think 10 permits isn't very much, but with the amount of dogs that some people use, it can have a severe impact. So this year, permits did go up from 7 to 10, whereas I think 3 years ago it was only 5 permits. So you see an increase of bear permits. You'll also see an increase of conflict between archery hunters and bear hunters. Any questions that I may not have? Another thing I'd like to point out, it mostly happens the first week of the archery hunt, and the last week of the archery hunt is when the conflict arises, because that's when people are taking time off to archery hunt. Deer and elk is that first week and the last week. And so that's when typically most of the complaints happen, is that first and last week.
Question, were these people that called you, I mean, did they have your number and they called you, or they reported somewhere else and then somebody contacted you, or how are you made aware of it?
Correct. So I was just in the field.
You're just in the field?
Just in the field. And every
chased you down?
Well, I stop and talk to them, check a permit, and as somebody from the division, they want to express their complaint if they have one at the time, and it was continually
you're just out excuse me, randomly checking your archer hunters, and they all had that complaint. The majority of them had that complaint.
That morning, Saturday morning, for the opening of the archery deer and elk hunt, I don't know of one that didn't have that complaint.
Okay.
Dennis, can you talk about, is that universal on the LaSalle's and the San Juan, or are you seeing it more on one than the other? Or?
This year we did see it more on the LaSalle's versus the San Juan. The backside of the LaSalle's is a popular area to hunt bear and to hunt deer and elk. So whereas the Abajos a little more spread out, the hunters are spread out. The bear hunters can also hunt the Elk Ridge, which is not a general season. So you will see a decrease in the complaints on the Abajos versus the LaSalle's.
Dennis, do you think that going back to the 5 permits will help, reduce those conflicts like we did in the past, the prior year?
I would say this year the complaints were higher due to the fact that there was increased permits. So I would expect that there would be less complaints if we went back to 5 permits, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. I wanted to give a little bit of that background, just to point out that, as Byron mentioned, we are recommending a reduction in those fall permits on the LaSalle's and San Juan from 10 to 5, based on that. And as we move through our conversations today, this weighed into some of the concerns and our recommendations on the book cliffs as well. We've talked about trying to move those seasons around and taking the season structure on the LaSalle's and San Juan and dropping it in on the book cliffs, really raised some concerns based on what happened this year. And so we need to be really sensitive about the number of permits and that kind of thing. So I passed a table around, we found after the racks a couple of small errors, which I'll point out on there. The presentation that the rack saw, though, was correct. So you're seeing the same numbers the racks saw in the presentation, but when we get to those tables, those are the numbers you'll be voting on, and so I just want to make sure you had the correct numbers there. So going by region, these are our permit recommendations. If you see a color on the right-hand side, that indicates a change. And so unless there are questions, I'll just highlight the changes. We're recommending on the Book Cliffs, Little Creek Roadless, an additional 3 permits. All others the same. In the northern region, we're recommending an increase of 2 permits on the Chalk Creek Camas North Slope Summit unit. In the central region, we're recommending an increase of 3 permits on the Central Mountain Nebo. And on the Wasatch West, I misspoke before. Wasatch West is the one that we talked about with harvest objective and some concerns about public land. We're recommending we change that from a harvest objective unit to a limited entry unit and increase the permits by 10 on the Wasatch Mountains West Central unit. Southeastern region has most of our bears, and so we see the biggest adjustments in that region. So on the North Manti, we're recommending an additional 7 permits. On the Manti South, an additional 7. On the LaSalle's, an additional 25 permits. On the 9 Mile, an additional 9, and on the San Juan, an additional 25 permits. In the southern region, we're recommending an additional 2 permits on the Beaver, an additional 2 on the Panguitch Lake Zion and Paunsaugunt, and an additional permit on the Plateau Fish Lake. I mentioned that there's one of these that doesn't totally comply with the plan, and that's the Fish Lake. The plan would have asked for at least an increase of 2, but with the fires down there, we have concerns about habitat, so instead of recommending 2, they recommended 1, and we supported that recommendation based on those fires. General pursuit season recommendations are here. No changes here. These just change according to the calendar. Restricted pursuit seasons on the Book Cliffs, LaSalle, and San Juan units. So that means there's a certain number of permits available, and people have to draw those permits to pursue. And those are the dates for those restricted seasons. We're recommending that we implement a bonus point system with a 2-year waiting period for those restricted hunts. We took a look at preference points, and the way that those work is that, you know, if you have a preference point, then you get chosen first. And so however big that pool is, we work through that. There's enough interest in those hunts that we figured it'd probably be about 20 years before somebody could draw once we work through all the people with preference points. If you drew out and lost your preference point, you probably wouldn't be able to draw again. So the system that really makes more sense is a bonus point system, and the way those work, as you know, is half of those permits go to people that don't have any points at all, just based on luck of the draw. The other half are reserved for people with a number of permits, and then the highest number of permits get to draw first and go down. That increases your chances of being able to hunt a little bit more or pursue a little bit more often, and so that's what we're recommending. In order to do that, we need to amend Rule R657-62 to include restricted pursuit as one of the things we offer bonus points for. An additional rule change this is to the bear rule, R657-33. This is just changes to reflect the changes you made in the big game rule regarding archery equipment. So nothing new here. We just want to make sure that those changes were mirrored in the bear rule. So 30-pound draw weight instead of 40. The arrow weight is the same. Same regulations for crossbows. We did a little bit of simplifying of language for waterfowl and upland hunters and legal weapons, which I think came up as a result of some things they found in the big game rule as well. Changed references to prima facie evidence to probable cause, and added a citation to the bear rule that refers to that bonus point rule to reference restricted pursuit and bonus points. After the rack process, we took a look at everything, and I have some notes I wanted to present and point out to you. So this is what we're talking about with that table I pointed out. We caught an error in the spring permit number table. The numbers for the LaSalle and San Juan should be 39 resident and 3 non-resident, and that was just an oversight. And then on the Book Cliffs Little Creek roadless, the season should be September 8th through November 15th, and the hunt should have 4 resident permits. I think it has 2 on there, and that was just a transcription error as well. Also, one of the things that we wanted to take a look at is females in the harvest by season. So this is a pretty busy graph. Let me explain it to you. So along the left-hand side are the percentages. Along the bottom are the years. The blue line is just an overall graph of the percent of females in the harvest over time. The green bars are the percent of females taken in the spring, and the red bars are percent females taken in the summer, and then the orange bars are those taken in the fall. Now, a couple things to point out here. As some of you remember, we did away with the spring hunt in 1993. So up until 1992, we had a spring hunt for bears. In 1993, that was discontinued. And you can see the effect that had on the percent of females in the harvest. In 2001, after doing some work and looking at levels of female in the harvest, we reinstated that spring season, and you can see the difference between the number of females that are taken early in the year during that spring season compared to what's taken in the fall there. As you follow that through to the last 3 years, what we did 3 years ago in 2015 is the spring season used to be an overlap season between people using dogs and people using bait. We separated those 2 seasons in time, and in 2015 was the first year of that. 2016 and 17, you can see the green bars, what happened to female vulnerability in the spring hunt during those pursuit seasons, during the seasons with dogs, and then the red bars are what it did during that summer season, during the bait season. It's also worth pointing out that our objective is 40%. So all of these numbers keep us below objective, except with the exception of those fall hunts. Female bears are the most vulnerable during those fall seasons, and so it's important as we make management recommendations that we take that into consideration. So if you're trying to suppress a population, that might be a good thing. That might be when you want to hunt bears. If you're not, that's probably where you want to have lower pressure and maybe focus your pressure early on. And this also has ramifications for cubs and orphaning and things like that, that if you hunt bears in the spring, you tend to not take as many females, and you have less concerns with that as well. So I hope that's a pretty busy graph. Hopefully that explained it. So in summary, change the summer bait season to May 26th through June 29th with no early baiting. According to management plan guidelines, 859 total bear permits. That's an increase of 101 permits over last year. Bonus points for restricted pursuit seasons with a 2-year waiting period, and then finally the archery and crossbow changes that the board voted on with the big game rule be reflected in the bear rule. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Darren. Any questions from the board? Wake up. Questions from the board?
Darren,
you put him to sleep.
I say I took lessons on hypnosis over the.
One of the questions I keep getting on is our our minimum bear chart that you have there,
yeah,
and that reflects more of an increase in the number of tags than it does the increase in the number of bears. Can you address that?
So the way this works is what we do is if you harvest a bear in Utah, you're required to bring that bear to a regional office or to a conservation officer and check it in. And so we see every legally taken bear in the state. We get our hands on it. So we know that those bears were alive in the field until they were harvested. And what you can do is put all those numbers into a table, and in a given year, if you, for example, someone brings in a bear and it's 4 years old from the LaSalle's, we know that that bear probably was on the LaSalle's the year before and was a 3-year-old. And you can add that to the 3-year-olds that came in the year before and so on and go back. And so you can do that through time. As you get later data, so 2017 numbers, you can only go back so far. It's kind of a diagonal working program. So this is going to get too complicated. Basically, you can back calculate. So that's what this is based on.
What are you saying, Darren? That we can't understand what?
No,
you're showing us?
I've been warned. Don't get too far into the weeds, and so I'm self-conscious. But so this is a life table reconstruction, and that's again why it's minimum. So this is based on actual bears that we see in our offices. In addition to that, when you compress the adult population to 2, you can actually estimate further forward into history, and so we can get, in this case, to 2016 with a pretty good estimate of the numbers. Again, if there's 10% or 15% natural mortality, bears that die from disease or other reasons, that would just shift the overall graph up, or the overall estimate up, because we're not accounting for those additional bears that we don't see. So that's why it's a minimum, and it's why it's an adult estimation, because if you can collapse your adults, you can get an estimate. The other thing is with cubs, it's illegal to harvest cubs, and so we don't see those, and we don't try to estimate a number based on hunter harvest. And 1-year-olds, again, people select against those small bears. They tend to want to take older male bears, and so that's what you tend to see. The female portion of this is based on the ratio of females that we see treed with regards to the number of males that are harvested. Again, by design, we discourage people from taking females, and people are selective about the bear that they take. They tend to take males at a higher rate than they do females, again, by design. So I don't know, Carl, if that answered your question. I hope it did.
I think I understand it, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. I mean, what it is, what they're asking is that is the chart, the reason we're seeing more dead bears is because we're issuing more,
because we're
permits.
harvesting more. Yeah, not in this case. This is based on the minimum number of bears there would have had to be the previous year in order to see the harvest that we see. And so I think I understand where they're coming from. It might be useful at some point. I'd be happy to do it, to actually really go into the details on this, and if you've got people that are interested in and explain how this is done. And I think once you kind of see it in practice, it's not rocket science, but it does take a minute to explain.
Okay, one question or comment.
Mm-hmm.
These are on this chart. These are your minimums,
right? Yeah.
So it could possibly be higher,
right? Yeah.
But we don't know exactly how high.
Yeah, it is. And again, this is a minimum adult, so it is higher. It's when you factor in yearlings and cubs, it's that's
obviously going to be higher.
Exactly, and then natural mortality. And that varies. This is a statewide estimate, and depending on where you go in the state, that'll vary.
Yeah. So in 2000, we're roughly, I'm just going to guess 1,200 animals, ish, and we're now at 3,400 ish. So we're 3 times as many in that
Right.
many years.
Right. And
so our population is definitely growing.
It's growing, and there's a lot of you talk to people in the field, and we see bears over the last 10 years in areas where we haven't seen very many bears.
And they're seeing more and
Right.
more bears, so it lends some credence
Right.
to this.
So there's a lot of anecdotal
It is actually
evidence.
going up. We are actually
Right.
do actually have more bears.
Right, and the plan recognizes that too. So
Right.
when we make adjustments based on those parameters in the plan, and the plan says you can offer more permits.
You can offer more permits.
That also indicates a growing population
Right.
that you don't have
Okay.
concerns. Yeah.
Thank you.
On the restricted pursuit permits, can you talk about what that restriction is as far as does it restrict how many other people go with that permit holder and how many hounds are turned out?
It restricts the pack size. The pack size is restricted to 8, and it also restricts the number of people that have the permit. Beyond that, people that come and visit camp and things like that, those aren't things that we. So in order to get that permit, you've got to draw it. You got to put in and draw it, and then your pack size is limited to 8 during that season.
And that's just when it's released on.
Right. That's when you're hunting in the field. Right. Mm-hmm.
Further questions? Questions from our rack chairs.
Yeah, can you go to the slide, Darren, on the nuisance bear harvest? It seemed like there was one year where, 2014.
Right.
I guess there's some other years if you go back, but what
nuisance
happened in 2014? Why did that go up so high? I mean, that's like almost a doubling.
Right. Bear nuisance can vary quite a bit depending on the situation on the ground, and so the southeastern region had a really busy year this year with nuisance, and it was because we had a late freeze in the spring, and we didn't get the acorn and berry crop that those bears rely on in the fall, and so they really start wandering, and a good place when you don't have acorns and berries is a a watermelon patch or a sunflower field, and so bears figure out places to go eat, and this can also be reflected in livestock depredation. Bears, you get individual bears that can be problems, but they tend to, it's kind of hit and miss on an individual bear may be a problem, but generally they probably won't be unless you get a year where they're searching for food. And so we try to take those types of things into account when we make our recommendations. We knew we had a bad year this year, but we don't want to overreact based on the highs. But over time, that trend has remained fairly stable.
Additional questions?
Yeah, I have one concerning this same chart, your sport harvest, your depredation. You say you try to get hunters that were unsuccessful to come in and take these depredating bears rather than just wildlife services or somebody else. And that's figured in the sport harvest.
Right. Yeah, those would be reflected there.
Do we know how many in that sport harvest?
I don't, Calvin, but I could find out. I mean, it's probably not, it's probably less than 20.
If I'm going to say, if you took those out of the sport harvest, what would your depredation, your yellow line at the bottom?
It wouldn't change.
Would it change that much?
a
Would it
great
spike
deal.
up like it did in 14?
I think you'd see an upward trend, but it wouldn't be
You'd
drastic.
see a little bit of a blip, but it wouldn't be like it was in 14. You wouldn't see double the number.
Yeah, I
But
think it
would
would
be a
change.
little, like say maybe 20.
Right. Yeah.
So we'd go from 55 to 75-ish. So it would be up.
Right. Yeah, it would.
So we are
and that's
actually
just based
harvesting-
on the number of bears.
Yeah. So we are actually doing more depredation than this shows right here.
No, these are work. Yes, these are the actual bears that Wildlife Services or the division has harvested, and so again, by design, we're trying to keep that number fairly stable and allow. So there's a couple ways you can address it. If you've got, for example, if a bear is in a sunflower patch and that bear is coming back and you've tried what you can, maybe a more appropriate example would be because in some of those instances we'll move the bear. A lot of the times we'll move the bear. Let's say a bear gets into a herd of sheep. That's a bear that we don't want to move somewhere else and cause a problem for somebody else.
We're just going to go somewhere else.
That bear needs to be removed. We'll call a hunter. We'll try to call a hunter, get that hunter to take the bear. Say, hey, doesn't matter. You need it. What size it is. You can't pass it up when you get there. That kind of thing, and give the hunter an opportunity.
You've got to take him.
You've got to come tomorrow.
If you go, you see him, you're obligated.
You're going to take the bear, and you're going to, and there's a time essence there too. You know, we don't want to wait a week when they can get off of work and that kind of thing. So
it's first thing in the morning.
Right. So in those instances, that's how we try to get hunters on depredation situations. The other way that
but those numbers are in the sport harvest, not the depredation harvest.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they would be. The other part is just in a general, you know, as we see bear populations rise, and we, especially on units where we know we've got conflict, we just raise permits, and so hunters can draw those permits and then go hunting.
Right. Rather than have to go through the depredation, let's just take them out to begin with.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any questions from the public for Darren? If you have a question, come up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and ask him a question. Remember, this is a question period. This isn't your comment period.
Dan Cockane. Darren, can you identify in the fall harvest of females the method used, whether it was a spot and stock, with hounds, or with bait?
I think so. Yes, we can, Dan, because we ask them when they check their bear in whether they use dogs or not. Unfortunately, now that you mention it, that would have been a good thing to have. I don't have those numbers for you, Dan, but we could certainly look at that. Yeah.
As Sterling's asking questions, I'm going to change just a little bit the way that we do this. The next section will be comments from the audience. So Bob Brister, if you'll get ready, you'll be the first one for comments from the audience.
Sterling Brown with Utah Farm Bureau. 2 questions, if I may. First is regarding the southern rack, Darren. And forgive me if you touched on this in your presentation, but as I understand it, a motion passed in the southern rack regarding the number of permits, and within that permit a floating flexibility. Will you explain what that motion was and what the intent of that was?
Yeah, I will. So the way that the plan works, Sterling, is depending on your management parameters, females in the harvest and males 5 years or older, and the harvest strategy on the unit, you get a window within which you can adjust permits up or down depending on how those targets fall out based on harvest data. The motion in the southern region was to make sure on units that are managed under the liberal strategy that within that window those permits be recommended at the highest possible level across the board. And then they also added a couple other units, the Paunsaugunt and the Plateau Boulder, and recommended that if they weren't already there, that we recommend the permits be at the maximum allowable by the plan. So that was the motion, and that's kind of why I think they made that.
The numbers reflect that.
They don't in all cases, and what we try to do, we typically will recommend on the high end on a unit where we've got, you know, livestock depredation or those kind of concerns. But on some of those units, there isn't that concern, and so the biologist, based on what he or she is seeing on the ground, may have recommended somewhere within that window. So they're within the plan parameters, but they didn't recommend the maximum points.
So again, the division, correct me if I'm wrong, has the latitude to go up and down within the recommended floating criteria you're describing.
Right. The plan, depending on what the harvest data, the previous 3 years harvest data is, the plan would recommend an increase, for example, between 0 and 20%, and whatever that adds up to, depending on the number of permits, is the window within which they can adjust.
Just to be clear, that adjustment happens in their recommendations. Once
Right.
those numbers are set, then there's no longer an adjustment
Right.
after this meeting. So that's an adjustment for their recommendations.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? Regarding this graph you have up and follow up on questioning that Board Member Crandall followed or asked. As I look at that, over the last 10 years, with the exception of 2014, it's been fairly constant numbers at 50 on that depredation line.
Right.
But clearly the population of bears have gone up over that same
Right.
period. So I heard the question earlier, but I don't think I heard the answer. So
Okay.
at risk of repetitive question here, what do you attribute that to? Why the increase of bears, but relatively stable harvest due to depredation?
I think as populate, what the take home I think from this slide, Sterling, is that as bear populations have increased, sportsmen have primarily benefited from the opportunity created by increasing population. But at the same time, the division is being able to, through our strategies, is still holding depredation fairly constant through time. A lot of times, especially with livestock, one of the best ways to handle a situation is to take the bear that's causing the actual problem. And so it's a fairly low number of bears for a lot of bang for your effort. Does that make sense? So if you have a bear that's learned to kill sheep and you can take that bear, and the problem goes away, you don't have to kill 10 bears to solve the problem.
And when you say take bear, whether that's your office or the hunter,
right, or wildlife services, if in the depredation situation. Now, again, with a growing bear population, there's increased opportunity for sport harvest, and so depending on how an individual unit is managed, those permits will reflect that. And that especially on units where we know we've got issues and we have chronic problems with bears and depredation, we keep those permits relatively high, and we try to keep that population at a level where problems don't occur as often, and then deal with the individuals in addition to that.
So could you and I talk offline? Could you provide me the data of number of calls and takes the division is taking as a result of depredation specifically?
Yeah.
That's not reflected on this graph.
It's part of this mix, and part of this too is probably a question of scale, Sterling. I mean, relative to sport harvest, depredation harvest is small, and so you don't see the fluctuations maybe quite as dramatically as you would if it was just by itself. But yeah, I'd be happy to get with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sterling.
My name is Jason Binder. I have a couple of questions. First question would be: are the complaints from premium, or are they on the complaints on LaSalle's and San Juan's? Are those from general season archery deer hunters, or are they like limited entry hunters?
Both. I know the letters were probably 50-50. There weren't a lot of letters. I don't know, Dennis. I don't know if Dennis knows both. I don't know that we ask them, what kind of permit do you have, but yeah.
Okay, so the next question would be: if a person draws a bear tag, takes them 15 years, and it takes a person 15 years to draw an elk tag, does either of those tags have priority over the other?
I mean, this is the social question. And this is something that we have these public meetings and boards to discuss. Yeah. The only thing I would say is that in terms of numbers of people that draw those tags, there are more archery hunters than there are limited entry bear hunters. But I see your point about points.
And the other question I have was, what is the margin of error with using this computer program model to basically estimate bear population rather than using actual biology?
So this is an estimate based on actual animals. So this is more like a census, if that makes sense. In other words, there isn't a margin of error. It's just this is how many we had to have in order to harvest these age groups and this number of bears. Other methods would have, sideboards, where you don't have 100% detection, that kind of thing. So again, this is a minimum estimate based on actual bears that we've seen.
And do we have any numbers on how many wet sows have been harvested in that 40%?
We could look that up. Yeah, we look at the nipple condition when we check them in to check that. Sure. And
has there been any tickets issued for people terminating bears that are wet sows?
I don't know it's obviously it's illegal to take a sow with cubs, but I don't know. I don't know if someone from law enforcement knows the answer to that, but I don't know.
Thank you.
Will Talbot, Paiute County Commission. Just one question on the population. Let's say Monroe Mountain, because we issue one tag. How do we come up with the population that is so low that we only issue one tag?
I think what I'll do is have Teresa from the region come up. She knows that unit better than I do, just on the ground. So, actually, looks like Vance is here, so even better. He manages that unit.
Did you just say even better than Teresa?
It just depends on what you're thinking about.
I was going to make a comment about Teresa's new look, but...
Oh, sorry to disappoint. But so Monroe, like Will said, is a really low bear population. It's growing, but slowly growing. And so when we've only traditionally had 1 or 2 permits on Monroe Mountain, and only in the past 4 or 5 years have we even had any harvest on it. And so it's very difficult to come up with population estimates in that. So it's really left to the best judgment of the biologist and those that and the input to that biologist. And so that's why in Monroe Mountain there's just really low bear permit numbers, just 1 this year. And where there is depredation problems, they can be addressed, specifically for that canyon or drainage that the bear is causing problems in, and that's kind of how we deal with problem bears on the unit, which we do see every once in a while, not a lot, but every once in a while.
So is there? You're saying it's not 100% take every year. They've only killed maybe 1 in the last 4 years.
Right. They didn't harvest in 2017. The previous 3 or 4 years they did, but previous to that, for years we had 0 harvest on Monroe for sport harvest anyway. So.
Okay. We're going to move into the public comment section. So comment cards, we have quite a few. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. Please do not take longer than 3 minutes. We'll start with Bob Brister. After Bob, we'll have Lynn Anderson. If you'll state your name for the record and, again, limit your comment time to 3 minutes.
Bob Brister, I live in Salt Lake City. The Wildlife Board has a public trust responsibility to represent the interests of wildlife watchers as well as hunters. There are plenty more wildlife watchers than there are hunters in this state, maybe 5 times as many. It seems to me that increasing the number of hunting permits by 100 does not take into account the interest of wildlife watchers, because the more bears that get hunted, the less bears are for us to see. Also, the majority of Utahns oppose bear baiting and hounding of bears. Again, I think you have a public trust responsibility to that majority of Utahns to reflect that concern and to continue these questionable practices of hunting and bear baiting and bear hounding. Really seems to me it violates that public trust responsibility to the majority of Utahns who oppose those practices. So I encourage you to revisit this issue and to take into account the majority of Utahns. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Lynn is up, followed by Jan.
My name is Lynn Anderson. I live in Bountiful, Utah. I grew up with a brother who hunted for the purpose of killing, not for the purpose of getting meat, hunted bear and sheep, etc., bighorn sheep. And so I am capable of loving hunters, but I do see them as immoral. I think that there's a lot of dishonesty in this room. I think if the purpose was for conservation, every person in this room who desires to kill could just put that same amount of money that they put into killing into habitat preservation. I think that the words used here are dishonest. The word harvest and take has been used 100 times. I've only heard the word kill once, except when you refer to bears killing. It's the humans in this room that want to kill. I'm not anthropomorphizing. Pain is pain. The purpose of what you call hunting is not to go out there and find someone and turn around and come home. It's to kill them. And the statistics that were presented when there was actual fairness in this attempt to kill without the use of hounds and bait were that the hunters failed. When there's any fairness or any what you call sportsman-like behavior, the humans fail. There's nothing manly about this. There's certainly nothing sporting about it. It's all based on unfairness. I would appeal to people's consciences in this room. If there was anything right about this, you could use the honest words. You could say kill. You could say the actual truth. But the fact that the actual truth is never said is a reflection of how somewhere deep in everyone's conscience in this room, you know this is wrong. And it's wrong for the reasons the previous speaker gave. I hope you'll consider that. And I hope that you won't consider someone a nuisance who's being pursued. That's just dishonest. And I appeal to the conscience of everyone in this room to stop wanting to kill. Find something more constructive to do with your free time. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan, you're next. After Jan will be Dan Cockayne.
Thank you. My name is Jan Ellen Burton, and I live in Salt Lake City. And I came here today to urge the Wildlife Board to say no to trophy hunting and to extending the season for hounding. I don't hunt, but I know hunters who do not consider trophy hunting to be the sport of hunting. My now deceased brother-in-law, Bill Burton, was the sports editor of the Baltimore Sun for many years. In 1999, he spoke in favor of legislation to stop can hunts in Maryland, stating in the congressional record, there is a common belief that the hunting of creatures which have no reasonable avenue to escape is not up to traditional standards. Shooting game in confinement is not within these standards. Canned hunting usually means shooting animals within a fenced preserve or a cage from which they can't escape. In the West, we use other traps from which the animals cannot escape. For bears, this means hounding and bear baiting. When hounds tree the bears, they are trapped. Although technically, bears could leave the bait alone and take off, this is highly unlikely given that they are primed to feed at baiting sites for periods before the hunt. So, for an angry animal, there is no reasonable avenue of escape. None of these methods, hounding, bear baiting, and spring hunts, can be considered as meeting traditional standards. People seem to have become deadened to the impact of their individual actions in the shooting gallery. I am not at all surprised that archers who are using more traditional methods are opposed to the quantity of bears in the wild. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And after Dan will be Guy Webster.
Dan Cockayne, for just the first second I want to represent myself. I believe it's immoral to stand up here at this podium and espouse beliefs that we're all killers and terrible people, but not contribute to the management or the conservation of the species, which hunters do. Sorry about that, getting too old. I represent the Utah Houndsman Association. I'm the president. We've passed out a letter. I think you all have it. We and I won't speak to the bear committee, which was gathered together, and this, but this is where these recommendations came from. So the Utah Houndsmen's Association supports the DWR's recommendations with the following exceptions. We recommend that the LaSalle, San Juan, and Book Cliff fall season dates for 2018 be changed to the following: August 6th through November 16th, with hound hunting restriction dates of August 18th through the 24th, which is the opener of the archery, and September 8th through the 25th, which is the end of the archery and the limited entry big game draws. We believe that this best deals with the social issues that we've discussed and that Darren has discussed. Just from personal experience on the LaSalles this year, we purchased a tag at a conservation auction and hunted there. We had one gentleman who had drawn a tag that was going to hunt with us. He also drew a Wasatch Big Bull tag, so he didn't hunt. He stayed on the Wasatch and hunted his elk. Houndsmen that I'm familiar with also spoke with two hunters who were not hunting with hounds. So at the very best, we have to subtract 3 of those from these complaint problems because they weren't hounds. We just feel like answering the social problem with cutting the tags in half is not the correct approach. That tag took me 12 years to draw, which meant I started applying when I was 45 years old. When we cut those tags in half, the chances are it'll take 15 more years for me to draw another one. I mean, Byron probably that age, but I don't know that I'll be in the shape he is when I'm that age. So it's a once in a lifetime for me, and I think there's better ways to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Guy, you're up. After Guy will be Will Talbot.
Guy Webster. I was one of the people on the Bear Committee this year. We met a couple different times, had great discussions about some of the problems, some of the things that we have addressed here. I also sit on the board of the Utah Houndsmen Association. Took the recommendations of the committee back to the Hound Association, and that is the recommendation the Hound Association has come to you guys with today. That was voted on. We didn't vote on it. I wish we would have, but it would have been a unanimous vote by those people sitting on that committee that we had addressed these, and taking the first and the last week of the archery hunts. The first week primarily the complaints are coming from the deer hunters. The last week they're coming from the elk hunters. The unanimous decision was that the vast majority, if not all of the complaints, would have gone away. We can still allow the opportunity for the hunters on these units. Bear hunting is it's a sport that takes as many years as these elk hunts. In a lot of cases, like's been said, the archery on the LaSalles for deer is a general season. You can go hunt that every single year. It's taken 12, 13 years to hunt these bears. Cutting the permits in half is diminishing opportunity by half. And like Dan says, it's possibly making it to where it's a once in a lifetime or a none in a lifetime opportunity for hunters. So we ask that you look at these. On the Book Cliffs, it's given some quality opportunity times. LaSalle's and San Juan, it's given that quality, but it's going to also eliminate or greatly reduce the complaints. One other thing, since the RAC meetings, I didn't quite catch it. The bonus point, I want to bring it to your attention. I'll use the Book Cliff second season. It's the season I on that restricted pursuit. There's not enough hunters that if we do that 2-year waiting period, there's going to go under subscribed hunts. I'm not opposed to the bonus point, but please look at it and say, do we need to actually enact that 2-year waiting period, because it's probably what's going to happen. You're going to have applicants put in this year. Everybody's going to draw next year. There's only going to be a couple permits. You're going to have undersubscribed the next year. Nobody's going to even be putting in and drawing for it. So you're going to be under. And then again, after that waiting period, you're going to have peaks and valleys. I don't know that it applies. Some of the units, yes. But just, you know, I sat on this board. It was all within the management plan you guys voted on, we all agreed on. You know, we talked about maybe coming back next year, but that doesn't follow the plan. I think we can eliminate what we're trying to eliminate by going with the Houndman Association plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Will, you're up. After Will will be Jason Binder.
Will Talbot, Paiute County Commissioner and Rancher, Sheep Rancher. First, I'll put my county commission hat on. I live in a little county, Paiute County. If you blink, you miss it. Between Mount Dutton, Boulder, and Monroe Mountain, which pretty well sits right in our county, there's 6 sheep herds left. Used to be probably 50, but there's 6 of us left. In that 6 sheep herds, this summer, one guy owns 3 of them. He lost 813 head, was what he was short. The 3 herds that go on the Boulder, we were out 700. I was out 300 of that 700. I also have a herd of sheep that goes on the Monroe Mountain. Now I put on my own hat. Well, let me finish though. So if you take that 1,500 head and you say they were all lambs, if they come home weighing 95 pounds, them lambs were worth $1.60. Takes 500 of them to load a semi. About $75,000 per load that our little county will never see again. And we're not saying they're all bear predations. You got coyotes, you got lions, you've just got natural death. Sheep do like to die. But you know, as I represent our county, I see how poor our little county is. We try like heck to survive. It's tough. It's tough to take those kind of losses anymore. You guys are all aware of the Monroe Mountain Working Group, the Aspen Regeneration. I'm right in the middle of that. I would like to convert them permit to cattle to get rid of the death loss that we've sustained on Monroe Mountain. Last year's second night on the mountain, 23 head dead to a bear. We really got nothing out of that. Happened on the 4th of July weekend, nothing. So in my talks with the Forest Service, I had a verbal commitment to switch that permit to cattle. Well, when it come down 2 days prior to turning those cattle out, it didn't happen. They turned backwards on me. So a week before Christmas, we had a meeting with the Forest Service, and basically they told me, you'll either go to that mountain with a herd of sheep willingly, or we'll force you to. My sheriff had something to say about that. You come in Paiute County, you start forcing people, I'm going to step in the middle of it. So in the talks of that meeting, I agreed to go with a 3-year permit to help with the Aspen regeneration, because if we don't have them sheep to rotate pastures, to rest pastures, the whole thing falls apart. But we gotta have some help from Wildlife Service. In my opinion, Wildlife Service has done me nothing. Let me hire a houndsman that on the 4th of July, when there's 23 dead sheep, he's going to respond. I'll pay him willingly, even give him my predator tax that the state gladly takes back to me. But you know, I don't want to take any more time, but I appreciate you listening to us and do what you can to help. Thank you.
Jason, you're up. After Jason will be Chet Young.
My name is Jason Binder. I'd like to thank you guys for having this open meeting so we can all come down here and express our concerns. Some of us agree with them, some of us don't. I think there's a real concern about year after year, bear permits keep going up, keep going up, keep going up. We have no actual biological proof of how many bears we have. We have a computer model of how many bears we have, but we don't know the actual bear numbers. I think that the division needs to start implementing plans to more bear studies. We had some good studies going here and they were just shut off. You know, we need actual data on an actual DNA on our bear populations. And, you know, it's really sad that we have to come in here and talk about a social issue of hunter groups against other hunter groups. You know, all of us, it's all of our mountains, it's all of our hunts. We should all be able to go out and enjoy the mountains and not have another group attacking houndsmen because we're on the mountain hunting our dogs and they've got a deer permit or they've got an elk permit. You know, it's the DNR's position to say, you know what, everybody should be able to use the mountain. You know, it's sad there's complaints, but they shouldn't be fielded as like 60, 80, 90. You know, there really can't be that many problems. I had a bear tag down there 2 years ago. Totally enjoyed our hunt. We hunted 30 days 2 years ago down there and never had a problem with a bow hunter or a rifle hunter or anybody else down there the whole time. We actually had bow hunters go hunting with us, went to bear trees with us, and they had deer tag. They were just down there and decided, hey, we want to go check out a bear. Fine, come with us. You know, I think we really need to start looking at how many of these sows are being harvested. I think the sow harvest is getting a little bit out of control. We're seeing it tip in the 40% range every year. Some years we've been over 40%. And I think we just need to take the time and realize we're managing bears. We're not breeding cockroaches and rabbits. Bears are really hard animal to manage. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Chet, you're up. Following Chet will be Sadie Young.
Chet Young, represent myself. I had a chance to meet with Riley Peck and Del Lichty down in their office. They was happy to meet with me and spend a little time and talk about the harvest objective to limited entry change on the Wasatch. I appreciate their efforts on that. I would like to support that on the proposal. And I support the rest of the division's recommendations. I would like to ask the board for next year's go-around to look into the relationship with Wildlife Services and maybe come up with a few ways to make sure that they're doing their job the way they're supposed to be. A few years back, I was doing a DNA study for the division with the University of Utah, and it was brought to my attention that when a bear kills a sheep, Wildlife Services takes that sheep. They can actually swab the lips of the bear. The university would like the information so they can do some kind of testing on that swab, see if that bear was actually killing the sheep. And I would just like to ask the board to maybe make a recommendation that we look into something like that and see if we're targeting the right bears on a consistent basis. Thank you.
Sadie, you're up. Following Sadie will be Bill Christensen. Thank you. So, Bill, you're up. Sadie's comment card clearly stated that she did not want to address the board today. She has some concerns that will go on record here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bill Christensen. I represent 8,000 Utah families of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation in Utah. Pleased to be here. Want to thank Darren and those that helped on the Bear Committee. It was enlightening for me to be part of it, and I learned a lot. After that meeting, we support the Division of Wildlife Resources recommendations with the additional fall season changes outlined by the Houndsman's Association on the La Salles, the San Juan, and the Book Cliffs. Now, for some reason, some people may hear, and with all due respect to everyone here, may not think that hunters have passion about caring for wildlife, and that concerns me. We all have different opinions. We need to have respect for one another. But I want to stand tall today for the North American wildlife management model. The only reason we're here talking about these increasing populations and whether we hunt them or don't hunt them and how we hunt them is because of hunters. Starting with great men, Theodore Roosevelt, Pitt Pinchot, people in the early part of the last century, we've been able to build the greatest wildlife program in the world, where we don't have to worry about government-owned wildlife. We don't have to worry about the king's deer, where all of us can watch, hunt, and otherwise enjoy wildlife. We have more and greater populations of black bears than we've had any time in my lifetime. When I was a kid deer hunting, if people saw a bear, they just shot it, which I don't agree with. They need to be managed like any other wildlife species. Whether it's a hunted species or a non-hunted species, the North American wildlife management model is the most successful wildlife plan that the world has ever seen. Mother Nature tends to manage wildlife by feast or famine. Population spikes and crashes. It's a great opportunity to be here living at this time where we can argue about the high populations of black bears and other wildlife in the state of Utah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and board members, for all your time. And please know that there are lots of people that have passion, that hunt, that go beyond killing, and I'm not afraid to use the word kill. But thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you. As Ben's coming up, Ben Louder, Sadie's comments were that she would like the Wasatch West to go back to limited entry, as proposed, and would like to thank Riley Peck and Dale Lichty for meeting with him on that matter. So, Ben, you're up. After Ben will be Kirk Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben Lauder, representing the Utah Bowmen's Association. We support the division's recommendations as presented. In addition to that, I would like to add that I had the opportunity to sit on the committee that Darren would put together. And I understand that there's some concerns and issues on the fall seasons on Book Cliffs, La Salle, and San Juan. And we'll see where you guys go with that today and how you guys address those. But I look forward to continuing to work with Darren in the next round of meetings and with the other conservation organizations to figure out how best to solve those issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Kirk, you're up. After Kirk, Aaron Johnson will be up.
Good morning. Kirk Robinson, representing Western Wildlife Conservancy. First, I'd like to thank the division for the fine presentation and their strong efforts to try to serve the public and to, at the same time, conserve our wildlife populations. I recognize that it's a hard job and that they try very hard to consider all values and interests. Having said that, my own personal views on this are probably pretty well known, so I won't repeat them. In any case, many of them have already been stated earlier. Specifically regarding the recommendations that the division is making, I approve of the shortening of the bait season in the summer. In other words, no 2-week period, but a 1-week period with the hunt to start at the same time as the baiting season, if I understood that correctly. And the reason that I do is I was a member of one of the black bear working groups that wrote the plan and long-term bear management plan. And we considered a number of issues and factors at that time, including scientific studies. And we recognized that in order to protect the female population, it's helpful to do various things. One of them being have the spring hunt early enough that it focuses mainly on the boars that emerge from the den earlier than the sows and tend to range quite widely, so that the sows and the cubs are thereby protected. Another issue concerns hounding and baiting as methods for taking bears. I personally have some concerns about those that have to do with issues of fair chase. But also, I'm concerned that having baits out on the forest for an extended period of time might be detrimental to bears. It might habituate them a little more to human kinds of food. I don't know that we have ever settled the question of whether that happens. It's a controversy. Prima facie, there's some reason to think that baiting could habituate bears to human kinds of food and thereby perhaps lead to more problems with bears in campgrounds and so forth. One last thing, with respect to the division's recommendations on the LaSalle and the Abajo, I know where the hounders are coming from on this. They feel like they're being cheated if the number of permits offered is reduced because they've gotten used to a higher number. I think what they need to realize is this number is always going to fluctuate depending on various factors. And it shouldn't be viewed as a social, as a contest between groups. As primarily a social issue, but primarily as a biological issue. And the division's recommendations are within the parameters of the plan and are well thought out, and therefore I support those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. Aaron, you're up. Following Aaron will be Brett Selman.
My name's Aaron Johnson. I'm the Vice President of the Utah Houndsman Association, and I brought with me the reason why I do all this. This is how I hunt nowadays. That's probably the reason most of us are here. We're trying to protect something to pass it on to the future. I support the Houndsman's letter that you guys read, and I appreciate Darren, appreciate the opportunity the Houndsman had to be part of the Bear Committee. Look forward to the opportunity going forward. I was on the LaSalle's this fall. I guess I'm the bad guy. I didn't have any complaints, but I will tell you a couple of stories. There was 3 of our SWAT members that was down there bow hunting. You know, these guys eat nails and poop out rocks and stuff, you know. Toughest human beings in the world, and they was down there bow hunting. When I heard about these complaints, I went to them and I spoke to some bow hunters that were down there actually hunting. They came to my camp too, but I asked them, what was the deal? What kind of complaints was there? And they addressed some concerns to me. And I said, well, did a hound dog ruin your deer hunt? Were you stalking a deer and then the hound ran through and the deer ran off? No. Well, were you hiking up in a canyon and you seen hounds run through and the deer were running off? No. So I asked them, I said, well, what's the problem? Well, we just seen dogs. And so I think it's a perception that a lot of these hunters have that if they see a hound dog in the woods, they're not going to be able to see a deer. Man, you can go down in the LaSalle Mountains anytime during the general archery season and shoot a deer from the road. And if you need help doing it, I'll volunteer to help you. Because while I was driving down there, I seen 10 bucks from the road. Now, when I offered them, hey, we done with this complaint? We need to have a shooting contest or a weightlifting contest. That didn't scare them. But when I asked about a spelling contest, they didn't want to get involved. So I think, like the complaints, Mr. Shumway, A lot of them are just a perception that if they see a four-wheeler or they see another hunter, they're not going to have as good of a quality opportunity. I've been to a lot of bear trees in my life and looked over there 50 yards away and there's a deer laying down and the dogs are barking treat. So to think that if a dog barks in the woods, the deer go to the next county is foolishness. Now they can scare them, but so can four-wheelers and other hunters. We all have a right to be on the mountain. Real quick, down there on the LaSalle's this year, I took 4 or 5 deer hunters into bear trees and let them take pictures of the first bear they'd seen in their life. On one of the occasions, I was packing this kid with me, and sorry, and we run into some deer hunters, and I asked them, "Do you want to come to see a bear?" And they had like a 13, 14-year-old girl with them. Yeah. So we walked them into the tree. We got about 50 yards from the tree, and that bear decided to come out. And that bear didn't know where we were at. Maybe it smelled us or whatever. But it come running right towards us. Boy, that girl was hugging her dad, and this kid was a screeching. It was wild and woolly. I promise you that 13-year-old girl will never have a more memorable deer hunt in her life. That's going to be the one she remembers forever. And that's just sportsmen sharing the mountain and getting along. We live in a world where people just seem to complain a lot. And the reality is we need to realize there's a lot more good and sharing going on than actually complaining. It's just easier to complain. I work in the public sector too, so I understand. Thanks for your time. Appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you. Brett, you're up. After Brett will be Sterling.
My name is Brett Selman. I live in Tremonton, and I'm representing the Utah wool growers. I appreciate you guys and your time for listening to us and all the work you guys do. The wool growers have a unique relation with bears. We get to feed them, and it's expensive. Will attested to that today. The slide showing the sport kill increase while the problem bear kill staying level shows that the divisions across the board doing things correctly. The one thing that I wonder if we could have some help from the division, and besides what y'all are already doing, but what about if we had division personnel help to confirm these bear losses? I heard a plea from Will today, having trouble getting his bear kills confirmed on the 4th of July. The Wildlife Services people are spread too thin, and maybe that could help address some of these depredation problems so they could be some compensation. The wool growers appreciates the effort the division has made to increase the permits with the increased population that we see on the bears, and we support the division's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Sterling, you're up. Following Sterling will be Allison Jones.
Thank you. Sterling Brown, Utah Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau stands behind all of the recommendations that have been presented, and we appreciate the division for their grassroots approach to coming up with recommendations. Though I personally was not on the bear committee, I appreciate those who did serve on that committee, including division staff, and stand behind these recommendations. Let me just make a couple points. As the bear population in Utah grows, what I am not convinced of is that there is adequate attention and time and resources from the division and others to properly support the livestock industry in particular as the numbers climb. And I'm grateful to follow 2 sheep ranchers that have spoke at this podium who are giving numbers and hands-on personal experience to this. But as a federation that represents thousands of grazers, are there adequate resources that follow the increased numbers of bears, specifically to address depredation? Now, admittedly, I don't have the answer to that, but there seems to be evidence that there is not. So having said that, I recognize that these recommended increased 100 new bear permits are in a direct alignment with where I hear there being livestock concerns. I'm hearing 3 areas. One, the Green River area. Second, just east of Indianola and those mountains in Sevier County, and then up in Cache County. And as I look at these numbers, the increases are in those areas to help positively impact these sheep ranchers and others. But I would ask, in addition to what was said earlier by some sheep ranchers, can there be not necessarily more, but can there be different approaches to specifically address depredation if in fact the board addresses or supports more bears? Thank you.
Allison, you're up. After Allison will be Troy.
Hello, I'm Allison Jones, Director of the Wild Utah Project. First of all, I wanted to wish you all a Happy New Year. 2018 will mark, I'm dating myself, 20 years that I've lived in the great state of Utah. I was fortunate within a year of moving here to be employed by the Wild Utah Project, a science-based conservation research group. Our mission is to provide science-based strategies for wildlife and wildlands conservation policy and management. We have a long history of working with your agency to do just that. I was also fortunate enough within a year of working with Wild Utah Project to be appointed by John Kimball to sit on that original black bear working group that wrote the plan in 2000, where we made the very difficult, almost painful decision to bring back the spring bear hunt. The group did that in the hopes that this would allow Utah to better meet that harvest objective of no more than 40% female take in the annual harvest. And as you can see from Darren's chart, that's exactly what happened with the spring bear hunt. And it allowed for hunters to be able to have the recreational ability to hunt this population and have a viable population despite being hunted almost every month of the year that these animals are out of the den. I'm here today to ask you to approve the proposal put forth by the Division of Wildlife Resources as proposed to you today. It's my understanding that you have before you an alternative proposal that was pushed through the racks at the 11th hour by special interest groups. My fear is that we are already at a place that is a delicate balance with both the spring hunt and the fall hunt that was clearly articulated by Darren's charts. If we move the summer season forward, so much so that it goes into the spring season, into as early as mid-May, you know as well as I that there will be conflicts with sows coming out of their dens, sows with cubs. And this seems like a risk, a gamble that perhaps we shouldn't take. The original dates that we've been following for spring bear hunt are based on sound science, careful deliberation, and it really isn't rocket science, you know. If you hit the season earlier, you'll get the boars instead of the sows. And I think that this delicate balance needs to be preserved. I also think this goes for the fall as well, as Darren's charts pointed out, and Darren explicitly emphasized that the fall is a very vulnerable season for the females, and by extending the season there in any hunting unit, again, I fear that we are going to be playing fast and loose with our bear populations. Let's not take a misguided experiment here with our bear populations. Let's exercise the precautionary principle. Let's follow the recommendations that they've been put forth, and let's especially follow the precautionary principle in this time of climate change, where you can just see by looking out the window that springs may be coming earlier these days, and we can't use our last many decades as any guidance of what will happen in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you. Troy, you're up.
Troy Jessenson, Sportsman Fish and Wildlife. Sports Fish and Wildlife also had the opportunity to sit on the bear committee. Bryce was there, and he was supposed to give the comments, but he's afraid he wasn't tall enough to reach the mic, so we got me here. Sorry, Bryce. No, we appreciate the time and all the comments here today. We actually support the Houndsman's recommendations. There was a committee put together. We discussed these things. We looked at the facts, and we believe that that's a viable plan. So Sportsman Fish and Wildlife stands united with the Elk Foundation and other groups in supporting the Houndsman's recommendation. Along the lines of what Bill said also, I take exception to a few of the comments here today. Utah is a great place. We have an abundant amount of wildlife, a variety of wildlife. The majority of that wildlife is here today for us to enjoy, both hunters and non-hunters, at the expense of hunters. Very seldom, in fact, never have I seen the opposition out there dirtying their hands, planting bitter brush with me, my group, and the people I represent. And I have not seen their canceled checks to make sure that these species are there for all of us to enjoy. They are there. I always maintain that hunters are the true conservationists. We have wildlife today because we hunt them. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate everybody's input. We appreciate the comments and the passion that everybody has for Utah's wildlife. I changed this around just a little bit today for a couple of reasons. One is to point out the importance of our public process. We have the opportunity to make these comments not just here at the Wildlife Board, but in several meetings, 5 other meetings throughout the state. That might be more convenient for you, and will be heard, and that's where we're going to hear that next. So from the RAC chairs, I would like you to introduce yourself first. We'll start with Dave and move down to Bryce. I would like you to introduce yourself first, and then give us your summary of your motions from your RAC meetings.
I'm Dave Black. I live in St. George. I represent the southern region. You had mentioned earlier today that our minutes were maybe a little bit confusing, so I'd like to walk through this motion as it developed. We had a main motion and one amendment to the motion. And so the motion was to accept the Division's proposal as presented with 3 exceptions. One, they'd like to see all the liberal bear hunt tags increase to their maximum adjustment. 2, like to allow the bait season 2 weeks early, which would be 1 additional week from that is proposed by the committee. And 3, they'd like to accept the Houndsman proposal as they presented it. And then there was an amendment to the motion that in addition to those in the liberal units, that the Boulder and the Paunsaugunt units also be increased to the maximum adjustment possible. And then we voted on the amendment first, and the amendment passed 8-1. And then we voted on the main motion, and it passed 9-0, unanimous. Does that make a little bit more sense? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. What I mentioned before, the way that was written, it was very difficult to follow.
I agree.
So you might pass that along. So I appreciate your clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. We'll look at that next time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kent Johnson. I'm representing the Southeast region. I'm sitting here for Tricia today. Our motion on this was really, really confusing. I'll read what we have in our summary, and then I'll get some points of clarification for you. The motion was made to accept the 2018 black bear recommendations and rule amendments as presented, with the exception that the LaSalle, San Juan, and Book Cliffs fall season dates for 2018 be changed to August 6th through November 16th. Pardon me. Getting over a cold, sorry about that. With hound restrictions from August 18 to 24 and September 8 to 25 for those units, as well as hound restrictions during the October general rifle deer hunting seasons on the LaSalle and San Juan units. The motion passed 6-4 in the RAC. And part of it was confusing, and I think that some of the members of the RAC felt that they were voting for a motion that would exclude hounds on the LaSalles and the San Juans for the entirety of the month of October. That was the impression that some had. I had the impression that it was just for the general deer seasons. And right before the motion was made, the final point of clarification that Darryl Meekum made the motion, he did clarify that that's what his intent was just the general season. But there was that confusion involved with it, and I think it's important that the board knows that there was kind of some confusion in the Southeast RAC over that. And then there was one other thing that was brought up in that we didn't put as an action item or vote on, but there was some concerns over enforcement of licensing and for guides. There's a large problem with people guiding that aren't licensed, and DOPL, I understand, is understaffed and is not too concerned about it. And the Southeast RAC would like the board to look into that and see if anything could be done to, maybe a joint enforcement thing with the division or something else along those lines. That kind of sum it up, Kevin. Okay. That, and anyway, did you get how our motion went?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, you got that.
The guide thing, no. That wasn't included in any of the motions or recommendations to us. But it was in your minutes, and so we understand that it was in the minutes, and there has already been some movement there. A law enforcement issue, though, from our standpoint, that it's clear whether you have a license or not. That we don't doppel out of it. If they don't have a license, then there will be potential ramifications there. So, all right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Jason Vernon. I'm the Regional Supervisor for Division of Wildlife Resources in the Central Region. Ron Camp, who is our chair, was not able to be here today and asked to be excused, so I'm sitting in for him today. So our first motion was made to accept the alternate recommendation as proposed by the Utah Houndsman Association for the LaSalle, San Juan, and Book Cliff Hunt Unit season dates, and that motion failed for lack of a second. Next, a motion was made to accept the same recommendation by the Utah Houndsman Association only for the Book Cliffs, and at the same time eliminate the early archery bait hunt for the Book Cliffs. That motion passed 7-2. And then at that time, a motion was made to recommend the Wildlife Board to add an action log item directing the DWR to look at similar season dates that was recommended by the Houndsman Association for LaSalle and San Juan units. That motion passed unanimously. Motion was then made to change the late season hunt start date on the San Juan and LaSalle units to August 6th. That motion passed 8-1, and that motion came about because of the conflict that we were hearing between big game hunters and bear hunters. And so the thought process there was if we added a few more days at the beginning of that hunt, that maybe a few of those bear hunters would harvest and maybe not be in the field at the same time as some of the big game hunters would be. So to try to cycle those hunters through a little more quickly. And then a motion was made to accept the remainder of the division's proposals as presented, and that was passed. That motion passed 7-2.
Okay. Sure.
Can you help me remind my memory of why Central RAC dropped off LaSalle and San Juan off this? It seemed to me there was something specific, but I can't remember what it was.
I think the division at the time had asked or had recommended that we wait and let them study the Houndsman's proposal a little bit further, give them some more time to look through it. So they wanted to give give the committee and the division more time rather than impose it on all those 3 units. They're comfortable with the book cliffs, but to hold off on those other 2 units specifically.
Okay, thank you.
I'll come back and hit this while I summarize, but it seems a little schizophrenic because you voted to drop that, and then later you voted to pick it back up. And so we'll talk about that when I summarize here in just a minute. But Dan?
Yeah, Dan Abeda, representing the northeastern region in Vernal. So we'll make this a little bit easier here. So we had a lot of good discussion on this topic, on this proposal. Good discussion on the harvest, numbers, seasons, genetics, etc. But the northeastern region accepted the division's proposal with the along with the Utah Houndsmen's Association's proposal as well, and that passed on an 8-to-1 vote.
My conclusion there is either the people in the northeastern region are much more agreeable people, or the presentation gets better and better as we go, because that is the last one presented. So, Bryce,
we're the second most agreeable group. There was 2 motions. The first one that they accepted it as presented with the and also with the exception to change the recommended changes from the sportsman letter and add the fall dates on the LaSalle, San Juan, and Book Cliffs with the corresponding dates. That motion failed 5-6, 5 in favor, 6 opposed. Then the motion was made accept the division's proposals presented with the exception to accept the recommended changes from the sportsman letter and add the dates only on the Book Cliffs and extend those dates on the as pertaining to the letter August 6th to November 16th with restrictions on August 18th to the 24th and the 8th to the 25th of September on the Book Cliffs only as a standalone trial, and that passed unanimous.
Okay. Thank you. So, in summary, there was quite a bit of back and forth and debate. So maybe to make this just cemented in our mind, the northern region wanted to go with the proposal as presented from the division and add the Book Cliffs from the sportsman, from the houndsman's letter only, not the LaSalle and San Juan. So does everybody understand that? Is that accurate?
Yeah, and we hoped this turns into a LaSalle and a San Juan thing in the next year or 2. That's why it's kind of a trial, and we hope it works. So,
okay. The northeastern region, after quite a bit of discussion, they decided that in an 8-to-1 vote that the division's proposal and the letter from the houndsman that changed some season dates, which is all that letter does. It doesn't change numbers or anything else, just season dates with the elimination of well, we can read that later. That passed 8-to-1 in the northeastern region. Sorry. I'm going to save the central region for the last here. The southeastern region, voted in a 6-to-4 that we would accept as presented with the changes recommended by the letter, and in addition to eliminate houndsmen or the pursuit with hounds during the general rifle seasons. So does everybody understand that? About that? Okay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the southern, as presented, wanted to make it clear that they wanted to change the numbers to the maximum allowable on the Boulder and the Ponsegont, so that they were in that liberal area. So they actually wanted to change numbers, not just season dates. And they also wanted to make sure that the bait season stayed 2 weeks prior, not just 1 week prior as presented by the division. And that passed 9-0 or unanimously, and 8-1 with the amendment that they had, right? Yeah, in addition to the houndsman. So they did the recommendation plus the houndsman letter plus the liberalization of the numbers. Okay, is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
Okay. And then the central region. Central region,
The point that turned in the central region, I now remember on that. The reason they did not go with the full hounds was this, the hound proposal will put hounds on top of the spot stock hunters on the LaSalle and the San Juan. So that's not happening currently, and it would put those hounds on top of that spot and stock hunt, and that's why the central region put it only on Book Cliffs and asked them to study that change. That makes the recommendation, at least in my mind, a little clear.
Yeah. But then they came back
And extended, it brought it in early.
and brought it early.
Brought the
but
dates
not,
in early, but that didn't put those hunters on top of anyone else.
Okay, so in
Still
so,
complicated.
So they voted to, in essence, they voted to accept the division's proposal with a change in dates that the houndsman had proposed early, but not late, just the earlier dates, and then to put on an action log the San Juan and LaSalle's to look at those dates in the future.
Right, yes, correct.
So all that page and a half of no, I'm kidding. That is boiled down to that. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, 155 pages in minutes, by the way, for the central.
That was in all 5 racks.
Or, yeah, I'm sorry, by the racks this time. So yes, it's not just the red, not just the central, but the centrals was a lot to look at. It was a lot to look at for this one item. Okay, so does everybody understand the RAC's recommendations? We're clear on what's come back to us from the RAC process. Okay, board discussion. Any further that you need to clarify from RACs or any additional information that we need to hear? Okay, board discussion.
How many total did we have accepted?
All of them accepted.
The division's recommendations.
The division's recommendations. And all of them in some way accepted the houndsman recommendations.
And
2 of them changed it. The other 2 added to it.
I think that the one improvement that they did make was done in the southeast region, where you eliminated the general season deer hunt to those late hunt.
Yeah, it's general season deer. Some of the county deputies and that had reported a lot of complaints from rifle deer hunters on both those units. I don't know if the complaints were taken up to Adam, the law enforcement section division or not, but, there was a lot of discussion about that. You'd see in the minutes there that it was brought up, and that seemed to be the consensus, out of the Southeast RAC, just kind of eliminate, just for that 1 week, we could eliminate the conflict. Is, both of those units, the division manages them deer-wise as opportunity units. So there's a lot of tags put out, and there's a lot of hunters there.
So we start shooting holes in a season and saying you can chase these guys except for this date, this date, this date, and this date. Doesn't that get a little bit complex for the law enforcement to and for the hunters to try and sort through season closures within a season?
Dennis,
Darren,
could you
can
talk to
Dennis?
that?
Yeah.
And on the San Juan, don't we have, if it would be, because it's a split unit, half of that unit is limited entry for deer and half of it's general.
Right.
LaSalle would be all general.
So typically there's never been hounds during the rifle deer hunt. By accident, last year, the year before, they started the latter end of the fall hunt the last 2 days of the rifle deer hunt, which was by accident. That has been changed. There's never been a hound season for bears during the general rifle season.
And is that going to be the case with our 2 season this year?
Yes, they changed it back, if I'm correct, so that way there is no overlap.
No overlap
No
this year.
overlap.
So,
It was
so
only
the point
1
that
year.
the southeastern region made is a moot point.
Correct. There's only those 2 days. The law enforcement section never had a complaint.
Quit being so careful, southeastern. You complicated things. Do you understand that? So you can take that back to your rack. So you understand
I'll
what
take that back.
the answer is.
Unless we accept the houndsman proposal, and that puts it on the deer hunt again, on those units.
And the spike elk hunt.
That's right. Oh, that's right. So that's why you carved it out of the houndsman. Okay.
That's what I was
Did you
gonna
understand that, Dennis? So if we accept this proposal that the houndsmen have proposed, it will be on those, in those dates, which we've never had before. Okay. So sorry, southeastern region. Good catch.
It wasn't.
So of those 3 units, to go with the houndsman, the only one that it doesn't really change too much is the book cliffs.
Book cliffs.
Maybe just to help with the discussion, there's some dynamic differences between the book cliffs and the LaSalles and San Juan. Late in the season on the book cliffs, you get some separation between big game species and bears, and so having houndsmen high on the mountain hunting bears and people hunting, late in the fall, big game hasn't been an issue on the book cliffs. And so they currently have their hunt later in the fall during that time frame, and they haven't had any issues. Their concern is moving a hound season into the archery hunt, and their concern, they did 3 years ago, they took it out because they'd had some complaints, and because of what happened complaint-wise on the LaSalles and San Juan, they have concerns about putting it back into that time frame. The difference on the LaSalles and San Juan is that you don't have that kind of spatial separation, and so if we adopt the proposal on those units, we'll be putting a hound season on top of fall general season big game seasons that doesn't currently occur, and we're concerned about complaints that may arise from that surprise. And so what we would like to do is take time, get some groups together, especially on the LaSalles and San Juan, and talk through this and make sure that we're covering our bases and think about all the ramifications. In addition to that, that's a dense bear unit. It's got a lot of permits, and it's getting to the point where we really need to start thinking about how we're going to separate people in time and space. And so just among bear hunters, trying to throw them all out there at the same time is difficult, and that's something that we feel like we need to have some time to take a look at and make sure we get right as well.
Just a reminder, everybody, please speak right into your mic. If you have to lean forward and have terrible posture, I don't care. Lean forward, get right in your mic. People in the back and YouTubers are having difficulty hearing us. So,
just a question, Darren. Do you think that? Thank you.
You're welcome.
With the reduction in tags, that they're only going to have 5 and 5 on the San Juan and the LaSalles.
That's been our experience, Byron. Down there is when we had 5, that seemed to reduce complaints. The other thing, just to reiterate that there is a biological component in the fall, and it's something that we'll take into account when we think about permits during those seasons, and that is that females become more vulnerable, and if you increase tags and your female harvest goes up, that results through the plan and reduction in tags anyway, and so we need to strike that balance between spring and fall as well.
But that's why we reduced those tags in the fall.
Right. Yeah.
But going into this proposed fall season that the houndsman came up with, that could create more conflicts because we've never had that in the past.
Right. On
other
those,
than just
on
the
those,
one time where, you know, for 2
right,
days.
on the
so.
LaSalle's and San Juan, I worry about that. That'd be a pretty big change. Yeah.
But if we eliminate it, they couldn't hunt during the general season, just like the southeast region brought out during the general season deer hunt or elk hunt, then that would eliminate that problem.
Right.
With those dates. Just
correct.
You got more dates that you've got to be aware of that you can hunt, can't hunt.
Right. Yeah. The on again, off again thing can get complicated the more you do that.
Additional discussion?
Question, how many total permits are we issuing? Spring, summer, fall?
On those specific units?
No,
or,
statewide.
359, no, 859, sorry.
800,
yeah.
so 859, and that's an increase of
100.
101, yeah.
101.
Yeah, I was thinking about harvest.
Which is a pretty good increase.
It is.
But we've got a pretty good increased number of bears. I mean, in the last 15 plus years, we're 3 times the number of bears. Right. You know, that one of the comments talking about the public trust to protect the wildlife. I think there's also a public trust to protect the people. I mean, nobody's brought up several years ago the family in American Fork Canyon. If that's the case, then we're going to 3 times the number of permits as there are bears, and we're going to take all the bears out to protect the people. I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, there's you talk about a balance.
Right.
That's a pretty good balance too. Not only is the bear population up, the human population is up as well. It's going to continue to go up. We're not going to stop the human population. So you talk about a balance. That's a concern to me. Are we getting too many bears for the people? So you know, I'm concerned about that. That also plays into the depredation. Are we doing enough for depredation? You've heard the ranchers talk about, are we doing enough there? You know, whether we put that on an action log to continue this to create a study or continue a study to make sure let's get the right bears. Are we doing enough for the bears, or do we just lump depredation, the coyotes, the cougars, the bears all into one? I'm not sure how that all plays in, but it's an issue.
Yeah,
it's an issue.
Let me just say that, you know, we support those efforts wholeheartedly. So we want to work closely with Wildlife Services to make sure that livestock producers and even, you know, people that are growing crops get addressed. And we work really hard to address those issues and don't. When we make our recommendations, we take that into account. We make sure that we're trying to address those whenever we make permit recommendations as well.
Good. You know, and the comment about the individuals out with his dogs and talking to the bear hunters. Well, you know, they didn't really scare the deer off, but we could hear a dog or there was a dog there, so the automatic perception is there is a problem. Well, maybe that isn't a problem. Maybe it's not as big an issue as we think it is. Kind of leads back into also to the LaSalle, you know, was 10 tags, now we've cut it to 5. Do we need to go back to 10? Is it really that big of an issue? And was it 5 the year before?
Yeah, and that's going to help them understand.
When was it 10 then?
The year before.
The year before.
Yeah.
Okay. So that again, that was my concern. You know, do we need to be more aggressive? Is it as big an issue as we think it is?
And that's what they're going to find out from flip-flop.
From doing this. Okay.
One of the things.
Okay. Thank you,
Kevin.
Yeah, I would just bring up from the southeast region, having the Book Cliffs, the LaSalle, and the San Juan in our unit. One of the things that really stood out to me was one of the proposals for that. First, when they started to discuss it, they talked about removing the month of October. That come from a houndsman that sits on our board. Later, that as the proposal was made, it was made just during the deer hunt. But that really stood out to me that a houndsman would make that proposal. And as I've thought a lot about that, I think the reason for that is so that they don't have that added conflict during that time. And that really says a lot for those guys. I think those guys that are in that area are trying to do their best to reduce that conflict. As it's been stated here, the Book Cliffs not being a general season unit, having a limited number of hunters, it was felt by our RAC that the conflict wouldn't be there like it would be on the LaSalle and Book Cliffs. The one thing to be noted is on our breakdown of our hunters, 20% of those are archery hunters, 60% of those are rifle. What would that conflict look like with 60% of our hunters out and that conflict during that time? I think it would even be that much increased. So.
I just want to make one more comment that we did have a committee get together per the plan. We had all the sportsmen conservation groups there, and they came to an agreement based on this recommendation that the houndsman have presented here today. So there was a consensus from the members at that meeting. I did sit in on that last meeting and stuff like that, and it was very informative and stuff like that. And you know, a lot of these things have been brought up today were talked about. So based on having a committee that comes to consensus with a proposal, I think that proposal is very good as long as we eliminate those general season dates, like Kevin just mentioned in the fall, that we don't want to create more conflict. We want to create more opportunity. We want to stay within our plan. But I think that a proposal or a recommendation to the board to make a motion is that we go along with this committee and we exclude those general season dates, general season deer hunt, general season elk hunt dates. Based on having that committee talk through the process, we've had 3 and probably 3/4 racks that basically approve that proposal anyway. Certain portions of it they're just wanting to see, but those are our 3 premier units, and we want to keep those premier, and we want to keep them all together and manage them. And we made a big step to go back to the 5 tags this year on the San Juan and LaSalle, which has always helped in the past to minimize that conflict. So that would be my recommendation, a proposal along those lines.
Question to that, is that just for LaSalle and
put your microphone up?
The question is that for the LaSalle and the San Juan, or in the book list would be exempt of that, or?
That's a good question, like I say, because when the committee put it together, it was all 3 together. It was my understanding that they didn't exclude. Is that correct?
I think just a point of clarification. In the committee, the mandate was to look at the seasons on the LaSalle and San Juan and whether that would work on the Book Cliffs. And so the discussion primarily in the committee was about the Book Cliff season. The way the LaSalles and San Juan came into this season structure that's been proposed by the houndsman is that the region had kind of looked at that discussion and was there for the discussion on the Book Cliffs. Was looking at the front end of that, where you have a week at the beginning of the archery hunt and a week at the end when hounds aren't in the field, and they thought that was something that they'd like to look at going forward. But I think it's fair to say that the discussion in the committee really focused on the Book Cliffs more than those other 2, and I don't think that we really, we're looking at possible conflicts late in the season on the San Juan and LaSalle. It's less of an issue on the Book Cliffs. They currently hunt with hounds during those seasons because of that separation I mentioned before.
Okay, let's summarize and wrap it up here, guys. What?
Just quick. Will and you sheep guys, there was a situation down on the Zion and Panguitch Lake unit through the summer. They had some bear problems, I think 3. The division was notified. They brought ADC in and they removed those problem bears, and they didn't have any more problem. Maybe we need to get together and work more, try to get ADC to help you guys out, because they're the ones that's going to help you to remove those problem bears. And if you can...
Did you want me to answer that?
No, I think you might have a problem with getting ADC there to help you out, and we need to talk about that and maybe get some pressure on them. Maybe the Farm Bureau and some of those guys can put some pressure on those to get up there and help you out.
Can I say one comment
Sure.
to that? I totally agree with you, but as these guys have retired, nobody's been replaced. These guys have a bigger area. They just take one guy, expand his area. I agree. They're overworked. In some spots, I think we have a personnel issue.
Appreciate that. That's not an issue that we can, you know, resolve here, but I understand that we can recommend and move that forward. So make sure you're talking into the microphone. Okay, any additional comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion then, Mr. Chairman, that we accept the division's proposal as stated with the following, that we implement the houndsman's proposal for the San Juan and LaSalle, and we do the book cliffs as a separate item with the dates that the houndsman came up with.
Any discussion on that motion?
Yeah, so when you say the dates that the hounds will come up with, so was that with the removal of the general season?
Yeah, that would be the removal of the general season.
The houndsman did not suggest that.
No, but I'm just adding that to it, that it would exclude the general season deer hunt and elk hunt dates.
But we're only talking about LaSalle and San Juan.
Yes.
Okay. Everybody understand that?
So the book cliffs is not part of that then?
That's what his proposal does not include the book cliffs. His motion, sorry.
Pick it up in a minute.
Okay, and we would address that in a separate motion.
In a separate motion.
So I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second, Kevin. Any discussion?
So the proposal that we've got in front of us, we'll put the houndsman on top of the spot and stock during October because there is not a general on the San Juan.
That's correct.
But for the whole season, or just
it would not during the spike hunt and the.
No, he's talking about the spot and stock bear
hunters. Because that, and what I'm saying is that these three units are probably different enough that they may need three motions on that. Because I might support that on the LaSalle, but I don't want to put those houndsmen on top of the spot and stock bear hunters on San Juan.
You understand that, right? Everybody understands what he's
saying.
But
let me clarify that, Carl. There's only 5 tags issued. Probably good chances are 90% of those will all be done prior to the general season, or limited entry elk hunt starts on the San Juan and the LaSalles. We originally always had all 3 seasons together, archery, spot and stock, and hounds. So there, at the most, there could be 5 at any one time out there during that spot and stock, and the high probability is going to be a lot smaller than that. So there's not really going to be any conflict, I don't think.
Carl's concern is not the spot and stock elk; it's the spot and stock bear.
Bear season, yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but there's and
Byron's
Byron's right. There is
season.
only 5.
Yeah.
There is only 5 on that. But I'm wondering if we're creating the same situation that we're trying to solve. You've got 60 spot and stock bear hunters down there who's spot and stalking and hearing a dog during that October, and so that's why I might be more inclined to separate those 3 units out rather than the San Juan because the San Juan is completely general season, and the LaSalle is completely general season. And so it would eliminate those dogs during that hunt, but on the San Juan it wouldn't.
Except for the 3 weeks of the spike elk hunt and the deer hunt together, there wouldn't be, under his proposal, there wouldn't be hounds during those 3 weeks of October.
On San Juan.
And LaSalle.
And LaSalle, yeah.
On the because there is a general elk hunt.
That's right.
On San Juan.
Yeah, that's
There's
right.
not
Kevin
a
is
general
correct.
deer hunt.
Oh, there's a general deer hunt on the San Juan.
On half of it.
Yeah, on half.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion? Okay, all opposed. Carl's the only opposed. The motion carries. So next, you said you wanted to address the book cliffs issue separately. So let's entertain a motion on the book cliffs.
Can I ask a question to do that? Darren, can you come and talk what that discussion was with the houndsman and what you were working to the compromise that you guys had worked together?
Right. I think, the heart of it is, looking at the archery season and complaints we have when hounds are in the season with archers. The compromise proposal tried to address that by eliminating hounds during the opening week of the deer season and the end of the elk season when the elk are starting to bugle and maybe the best. So take the best times for archers and eliminate hounds from those seasons, but then allow hunting with hounds during the rest of the season. And so that was, again, the group, I think, felt pretty good about that. There were some things that I think that at the time we didn't realize, and so our recommendation was both on that and on other issues, addressing specific depredations, things like that. We felt like there are a lot of issues that really do merit further discussion, and so that'll occur regardless. Yeah. But that was the spirit of it.
Which is what you just adopted, right? I mean, that's what Byron's proposal was.
But only addressed to those two units.
Right.
Yeah. Just as a point of clarification, Byron, I assume, but I don't want to assume, by being closed during the general seasons, you mean the dates. So if there isn't a general season hunt,
open.
Then
just like the
it would be
recommendation
open.
that they came
Okay.
up with, yeah.
So that'll require us to split some of those units up because the Elk Ridge is different than all right. That's why I wanted to make sure I understood.
My point was this
Good
is going to
luck.
be very complex. Okay. Book cliffs.
So the proposal that I have, if this is correct, that the Houndsman Association presented would be change the following from August 6th to November 16th with hound hunting restriction dates of August 18th to the 24th and September 8th through the 25th.
Right.
And that would be for the book cliffs only.
But that's what we just adopted for the other two. So
but theirs was also for the whole month of October.
Okay, so what you're saying is that for the book cliffs, you would go exactly with this and not eliminate the general season hunt, which they don't have a general season in the book cliffs. So
exactly. So the conflict's not there.
So basically, what you're proposing is to say add book cliffs back to the proposal that was just given.
No.
In essence, it is.
So, if I understand the Houndsman proposal, they wanted to have the whole month of October to be able to hunt with hounds. We removed that because of the general season hunts on the LaSalle and San Juan, but we're saying that it would be okay to do that on the book cliffs.
Right.
That's the motion we're trying to create.
Which is okay. Which is the same thing.
And currently, I mean, on the book cliffs, we have not had hounds in August and September because the fall hunt starts on October 1st.
Right.
So it's this. I mean, this is a big change to move those into August and September.
Right.
Have Dax come up with that can come.
Well, again, just to be clear, we just adopted, right or wrong, we just adopted what you just said, the season dates for the LaSalle's and the San Juan, and what you just proposed for the book cliffs is no different because the book cliffs does not have a general season deer hunt.
Right, but under their
or elk.
Right, under their proposal, they would want to be able to hunt the month of October,
which is what we just did. for San Juan minus the general season.
Exactly, and theirs would include they could hunt during that general season if it was voted on.
Can I interrupt?
You bet.
There is a general season elk hunt spike.
Oh, spike.
On the Book Cliffs.
That is classified as a general.
It is, yeah.
Season,
So
yeah.
those are the statewide tags. So just kind of keep that in your head. Because you are saying deer and elk general season. Okay.
That's what. Okay.
Again,
But
just
we'll get
so I
into
don't
season.
assume, by general season, do you mean any weapon, or do you mean all general season hunts? Because that includes archery,
Any
muzzleloader,
weapon.
In the
any
month of
weapon.
October,
Okay.
right?
That's what I thought, but I just want to make sure.
All right. So everybody understands what we just passed, right?
Explain that to us.
So
the more we explain, the more confused I get.
So, Kevin, specifically, we just passed that hunting the LaSalle and that the division's proposal would pass. In addition to that, the LaSalle and San Juan season dates would be changed to August 6th to November 16th, with hound hunting restriction dates of August 18th through 24th and September 8th through the 25th, with the exclusion of the October general any weapon hunts for both deer and elk. That's what we just passed.
Statewide. Or just on
Doesn't matter. That's not. And that's what we just passed. What you just proposed is that we do the exact same thing for the Book Cliffs. So,
except, so I didn't make the motion, but what I was proposing there was that the month of October would be open.
regardless of the general season hunt that's going to be.
And then it was brought up that there is that hunt. And with that discussion, I think there is a lot of wisdom in what the division is stating and in getting together and working these out, because there's so many intricacies. So.
Okay, I need a motion. That's fine.
I'll make the motion that we include the Book Cliffs with my prior motion.
Which would eliminate the general season, the exact same thing.
Exact same thing.
What about adding the division's proposal as presented with that?
That was part of the
That was part of the original motion.
So including that means we revote the other, or we just do a separate, it's the same proposal as we did on the other, a separate vote on the separate unit. Okay.
Just add the Book Cliffs to that. Everybody understand that? Okay, I have a motion. I've got a second. All in favor? Okay. So, we appreciate the input. We appreciate the rack process. I think that there will be some, just on a personal note, I think there will be some difficulties in making sure that that happens and that it's implemented the way that the rack process and now the board has voted. So,
good. Before we leave this, action log item to get the division personnel, wildlife services, whoever, whatever, put more pressure on there to get more done. I mean, we're not in charge of hiring wildlife services, but if we can put a little pressure on them to replace the people that have retired, so we're not spreading them out so thin. I mean, we could put a letter or some bug in somebody's ear that says, "Hey, we're having issues here. We need some help from wildlife services."
I don't
whether
know.
that's a letter from the board, whether that's a letter from you, director.
I can tell you we work closely with Wildlife Services now, and we do encourage them to fill those positions. It's an ongoing discussion, but they're a federal agency, funded federally.
Right. I realize that's not our position, but if we can do a little more to encourage that.
If the board wanted to write a letter, that'd be fine, but I'm telling you that we're already coordinating closely with Wildlife Services and trying to do the best that we can with them and their resources as well. So.
Okay. Do we need an action log then to study those depredation takes? Are we doing enough there to do that?
I think the graph would show that we're maintaining a pretty consistent with an increasing bear population. They're doing a really good job. Right. I know it's frustrating for the individuals who lose. But if you look across for the last 10 years, with the exception of 1 year, it's a pretty flat.
Right.
So I think they're doing a pretty good job in managing the resource with sport hunting.
Yeah. There was a comment or concern by Mr. Young about the study and swabs, this, that, and the other. Is that going on, or do
that's
you need
a possibility, and that's something I think that we could talk with them. I don't think we'd want to do that across the board, but
the only thing that would do was prove that the bear that we just took was the one that was that bear was actually eating some sheep, not necessarily
really it's
the
a timing thing too. Yeah. It's just if Wildlife Services can get in the field quickly, generally the bear will still be in the neighborhood.
If things are ongoing enough and we don't need one more thing on the action log, then I'm okay with that. Yeah. But if we need that to remind us of what's going on, maybe put that on your list of things to do, is report back on what's going on there.
I'll be prepared to discuss
if you would do that, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
One more thing, there is a archery only season hunt on the Book Cliffs during that archery time frame. Right now,
much like the spot and stock.
Right, so you'd have.
But it's archery.
So as things stand now, you'd have an archery only hunt on top of a hound and bait. I think we just need to decide what we want to do with that archery season. I'd suggest that we just eliminate it and put those permits into the spring season, but I think the board probably needs to vote on that.
Here. We asked Ben Louder just on that.
Yeah.
Based on what Darren just said, that we put an archery season or put hounds on top of that one archery season, I mean, what's that going to do to you?
I think it makes. I agree with Darren. I think it makes sense to eliminate that hunt. I've reviewed that hunt over the last couple of years. It's been a very low success hunt. I don't know that we're giving up a whole lot to eliminate that hunt, and I would support that.
Put those tags into another archery hunt. Okay.
Well, he had recommended the spring season, whether that's the spring season or the summer season, or split them between the two. Or, yeah, I think that makes sense. I would support that.
Okay.
Thanks, Byron.
I'm really sorry, guys. So that we're clear, and why I'm shaking my head is because when we take a recommendation that's outside that recommendation that's given, we haven't looked at all of these. I mean, so this was not mentioned in all of that rack process, all of the stuff that went on, the discussion, and so here we have now created a conflict that we didn't completely address through that whole system and give our Darren and his staff time to figure that out. And so now we're jumping to fix something that we just created, 5 minutes later. And so I think that I mean, we just did that. Now we've got archers who will draw that tag and not know that there's I mean, it's on them to look and see what other seasons and what other stuff is going on.
Eliminate the hunt before they have a chance to travel.
And now we're going to eliminate, or not going to. There's potential here that we talk about eliminating a hunt before we've heard the public or discussed that fully, and so that's why I'm shaking my head.
And
I apologize.
And you are correct. This topic did come up in the Central RAC, and it was part of the Central RAC's recommendation to eliminate this hunt if we did the Book Cliff hunt. So it's not. It wasn't discussed, but it was only discussed in one RAC.
Darren, can you come up and explain exactly what that proposal would be?
As far as the
hunt,
the proposal,
the numbers of
made,
permits, where you're planning on putting them.
Yeah, I mean, just this specific issue, I don't think it makes sense. So the way that we have it now with that proposed season, you know, so those late seasons could be hounds, it could be a bait. So we already have an archery opportunity overlapping now this archery only hunt. The way the Book Cliffs had it set up, they had that archery only hunt during the archery season, and then they hunted with hounds and bait later. So now that we've moved that back, we've got this kind of outlier archery hunt. There aren't a lot of permits on that. I did talk to the region ahead of time, you know, anticipating that we may wind up with these seasons. Their preference would be to eliminate that hunt and move those permits into the spring season. And I can look at the numbers. I think it's 13 permits or something like that. And they're actually split between the Book Cliffs South and the roadless. The roadless, I think, we would remain the same.
Dax, we need to see those numbers.
Where's Dax?
We have the numbers here. It's on this table. It's the Book Cliffs Bitter Creek South archery only hunt from August 6th to September 7th. There's 7 permits. Book Cliffs Little Creek Roadless has 6 permits, same season date. Those are the two units. We would then roll those 13 permits into the spring hunt.
Right. That would be our recommendation, and something that just
into the
occurred to
spring
me.
hound hunt,
Right.
which is a much
Right.
greater success than the ones we're taking them out of.
That's true.
But 7 permits there certainly success-wise aren't going to translate to 7 permits in the spring. You know, if we look at a percentage.
One thing too that throughout all these discussions, just to make sure we're all clear and I understand, when we talk about the Book Cliffs, we're talking about that Bitter Creek South unit. We're not talking about the roadless area.
Roadless, yeah.
So the roadless would remain the same. So I think those permits on the roadless area we won't do anything with. So it'd just be the ones on the Bitter Creek South that would need to go somewhere else. And again, the region expressed, you know, they'd like to see those go to the spring, but obviously if you feel like it's
so
more
if we're going to eliminate that hunt, the 7 tags from that hunt, how many tags would you suggest that we put into the spring?
The total number for the unit is the number we generate according to the plan, and so where those tags land and the numbers are decided by the biologist. And so I guess I defer to Dax. I personally,
right. But my point is that we're talking about 7 tags from a very low success hunt into a higher success hunt. You know, 50% success.
We'll take more bears,
so
but again, that'll shake
bears.
out in the plan. We'll look at what the harvest is, and if we need to adjust later, we'll do that.
Chairman, can I ask a question? Because of this insight after and the things, I think there was a compromise trying to be made between the 2 proposals of the division and what was brought forward. But like you said, there were some things unforeseen. The question I have is, with that, could we, could there in any way be a proposal be made to do what the division's asked and go with 1 year, give them that year to, and vote for the division's proposal and give them that year to work out all of these season dates? Could that be done? Instead of changing all the seasons that they've said here, could we vote to go with the division's proposal and give them that year to come back with that?
I'll tell you, okay, we make a lot of decisions here. Some of you go home and you think, what was I thinking? This is probably the two votes that we've just taken here, the two in my years on the RAC, on the year on the Wildlife Board, that I'm the most uncomfortable with on that. I would echo what Kevin is saying. It is a big change. I echo what Byron said. I love the fact that the houndsmen are trying to solve something and have gone a lot of effort to do that. But those two votes and the decisions that we've made today are the two that I'm the most uncomfortable with on that. And so let's see where this goes. I will make the motion that we back out of the two votes that we just made, and that we give this a year to settle, to reevaluate, and look at. And if I get a second, great. If I don't, then that's where it's at. But then my conscience will feel better about those two votes.
Okay, let's hold on for a second. Hold on, stop. Okay, first of all, I think we can have a motion. I mean, that's not something. Greg, where's Greg? Greg, you can't leave now. There's nothing wrong procedurally with that, correct?
Greg Hansen, Assistant Attorney General. If you're looking at revisiting an issue that you've already addressed here today, I don't see a problem with you doing it so long as it's done in an open meeting and the motion's seconded. So I think you're more than welcome to go back and revisit an issue if you're starting to identify potential problems with a previous vote.
Okay, thank you. So I have a motion from Carl. Do you understand that, Stacy? That would it would negate our previous motions and accept the division proposal as proposed, period. Correct, Carl? Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Yeah, questions, discussion?
My question is to Darren and the division that do you need another full year to do what we just voted on? What would you change? What would you look at to make that different than what we just did?
I think some parts of it for sure, Byron. I mean, that's been our proposal all along. I think the Book Cliffs is a little less messy than the San Juan and LaSalle. They're less moving parts, but again, as proposed, as the houndsman proposed that we have that archery issue on the Book Cliffs. We do have concerns about overlapping it during that archery season. But I think that's a little easier to deal with if that's the board's desire. I think with LaSalle's and San Juan, we really need another year. And there's additional issues in terms of the numbers of permits on those units and trying to separate people in time and space that obviously we can't tackle today. And we really do need another year to look at that and get with the region.
And our proposal also included the extra general season stuff. So, I mean, it was more complex than just the houndsman, too. So.
Right, yeah.
Well, it was, but that was to help the houndsman so we didn't have those conflicts and stuff like that.
Right.
But you were aware of what we were going to do with the Book Cliffs on those tags.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
You've already come up with a solution for that.
The 5 racks had recommended that, and so, we planned.
You've got another meeting planned this coming year to go through and review all those things already. You've already talked about that we would get together again, even though it's not in the plan, to have another meeting because we just did the 3-year meeting on the plan.
We would do that regardless.
You are going to do that regardless. So we do have that covered with our proposals we've done already. Yeah. We will review it and see what we did. But we will know what the results are after we go through this whole thing for 1 year as to what we really need to tweak, and give us a better idea what did we do and how can we make it better, going through that plan process next year.
Right.
Thank you.
More discussion? I have a motion.
Second.
I have a motion from Carl, a second from Kevin. All in favor of that motion?
So we're
discussion.
We're backing out of the houndsman's recommendation.
We are negating our previous motions, period.
Going back to ground zero.
That's the first part of it. The second part is to accept the division proposal.
Period.
Period.
We have two separate motions then, won't we?
No, it's the same motion.
It's all in one. We're going to back out and just accept the recommendation.
Yep.
Give them a year.
That's the first. We've got a motion and a second. Everybody understand that? All in favor of that? Any opposed? Byron is opposed. That motion carries. Wow. No.
Mr. Chair.
No.
What about here?
No.
Oh. If I might, with that decision, then that brings back into play.
It's just like the motion you didn't understand that we. Sorry.
That brings back into play the motion from the Central Region asking for an action item to direct the division to study the San Juan and LaSalle.
Which they just committed to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I just wanted.
Goes without stating. Well, they're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's what Darren just said.
Does anybody feel the need to make that an action? I mean, it's to make that an action log.
You're going to say, do you want that officially on the record that it is an action log, that we put all that together and report back at the next a year from now? I mean, we will, but we want that in front of us on the action log.
Obviously,
that's all I'm saying.
That's your prerogative. I don't think we need to do that officially. We're gonna do this regardless of.
Will you report that back to your region that will happen?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay. Justin. Where's Justin? Justin left. He's presenting, but he just left. Couldn't stand it any longer. Justin, give me an idea of how long this is. This next one.
Oh, I'll just take a short 45 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. No, 5 minutes or less for my presentation.
Okay.
Quick
if you could do that while the rest of us break for lunch, that'd be appreciated. So, you know.
This is simple. This is quick. Not complex.
We'll proceed then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Justin Shannon. Today I'm going to present the CWMU Advisory Committee members. In R657-37, that's the CWMU Advisory Rule. It says that the CWMU Advisory Committee members shall be nominated by the Director and approved by the Wildlife Board. And so the purpose of the CWMU Advisory Committee is to hear complaints against individual CWMUs, review the operation of the CWMU program as a whole, hear variance requests, and make recommendations to the Director and the Wildlife Board. It says in rule that committee members shall include the following representatives: 2 sportsmen, 2 CWMU representatives, 1 agriculture, 1 public at large, 1 elected official, and 1 RAC chairperson or member. And today what we're doing is asking the Wildlife Board to approve the following committee nominations and their associated terms. So for sportsmen, we'd recommend having Greg Wilding appointed again for a 4-year term, and for Matt Brimhall to finish his 4-year term. He's 2 years into it. And when it says expires 2021 or 2019, this would expire December of 2019, if you would. So it's essentially a 2-year term or a 4-year term, or the 4-year term. For CWMUs, we'd recommend Tim Friess and Wade Heaton. And then for agricultural, this is a new recommendation. This would be Kelsey Berg. She's with the Farm Bureau. With the public at large, we'd recommend Mike Christensen. He's worked with us on a lot of issues. He's out of the Central Region. For elected officials, we'd like Evan Vickers, Senator Vickers, to finish his 2-year term. And then for the Regional Advisory Council, we'd recommend Mike Lauder. He's out of the Northern Region for a 4-year term. And that's all I have. Thank you.
So if we vote we're voting all of these? How come we're having to revote the ones that have already been?
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that. Many of these members are already in their 4-year term, and by rule, it's supposed to be a staggered one, so that way we don't bring a bunch of new people on that don't have the experience or the background of what's occurring. And so that's why there's a staggered vote. The new ones that have the stars by them, Mike Lauder, Mike Christensen, and Kelsey Berg, these are new members that are going to be coming on. And then the other ones, Tim Fries and Greg Wilding, we're asking them to have another 4-year term at it. So they've been on the committee before, finished a 4-year term. We're asking for another one. The other 2019 ones, they're just 2 years into their 4-year term already. I probably could have presented that better. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Okay, does everybody understand? Okay, any discussion? Rack chairs, do you have any concerns? Seeing none. Any discussion up here? And I meant none.
One.
There's one. Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's only because his plane isn't leaving until a little later. All right. I'm ready for a motion then.
I'll make a motion that we can accept the division's proposal on the...
Okay, I have a motion from Donnie.
I'll second that.
And a second from Calvin. No.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
No.
Did you get public comments or questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Fill out a card.
No. Any concerns, questions? All in favor? Okay. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darren, why didn't you make it that simple?
I think Darren did. Just on the record. Okay, we will now break for lunch. However, lunch is not in its normal spot. Lunch is waiting for us an hour ago at the Lee K Center. And the longer we take to get there, the less appetizing that lunch will be. So for board members, those that are invited, the rack chairs, we have a lunch over at the Lee K Center. At that point, the meeting will be adjourned. So I'll accept a motion to adjourn our meeting now. Okay, it's made. Any problems with that? Okay, thank you.
That was my next question.
Stacy's got a map for you to get over there.
Give me an address.
Stacy has a map.